The summer bride, the debt collector's shadow, fell across Evelyn Carter's dying father like a threat made flesh. Samuel Hartley stood in the doorway of their sweltering Montana cabin, legal papers in one hand, a smile that didn't reach his eyes stretching across his face. "Marry me by week's end, Miss Carter, and your father dies in peace instead of debtor's prison." Outside, late summer heat shimmered off the parched earth, and somewhere in the distance, lightning fires painted the horizon the color of old blood. Evelyn's hands, still damp from wringing out fever cloths, curled into fists. "Get out. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, stay with me until the end of this story. It's about a woman who refused to be bought, even when the cost of freedom seemed too high to pay. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Evelyn's journey travels. Now let me take you back to where it all began, in the brutal heat of a Montana summer that would change everything. The cabin held heat the way a stone holds cold, stubbornly, meanly, long past when it should have let go. Evelyn pressed a cloth to her father's forehead and felt the fever radiating through the thin cotton like something alive and angry. 3 weeks of this. 3 weeks of watching Thomas Carter, once a man who could fell a tree with 20 swings and carry a full-grown sheep across his shoulders, waste away to nothing but sharp bones and rattling breath. "Water," he whispered, and Evelyn reached for the tin cup beside the bed, tipping it carefully to his cracked lips. The door stood open to catch any hint of breeze, but all it caught was dust and the acrid smell of distant smoke. Lightning fires had been burning in the high country for days, turning the August sky a sickly yellow gray. Evelyn had watched the smoke columns grow thicker each morning, creeping closer to their small plot of land like a slow-moving judgment. She'd stopped going to town 3 days ago. The looks had gotten too heavy to carry back up the mountain, pity mixed with something uglier, something that said, "We told you so," without words. Her father had borrowed against the land during the hard winter, when pneumonia had first started eating at his lungs, and the cattle had frozen in the fields. $600 from a man Evelyn had never met, with interest that compounded faster than grief. Now that man was at her door. Samuel Hartley filled the frame like he'd been measured for it. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed too well for the backcountry in a gray suit that probably cost more than Evelyn's entire wardrobe. His hair was oil-slick black, combed back from a face that might have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his pale blue eyes. "Miss Carter." His voice was smooth as creek stones. "I've come to discuss your father's debt." Evelyn stood slowly, positioning herself between Hartley and the bed where her father lay breathing in shallow gasps. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. "We have until the end of September. The contract says payment in full or seizure of collateral." Hartley stepped inside without invitation, his boots loud on the worn pine floor. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, snapping it open with a practiced flick. "However, I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer an alternative arrangement." Something in his tone made Evelyn's skin crawl. She crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly aware of how thin her dress had gotten from too many washings, how her hair hung loose and unkempt from days of bedside vigil. "What kind of arrangement?" Hartley's smile was a slash across his face. "Marry me by week's end, and I'll consider the debt satisfied. Your father can die in peace instead of watching his daughter lose everything he built." The words hung in the superheated air like the smoke outside, toxic, suffocating. Evelyn heard her father try to sit up behind her, heard the wet rattle in his chest as he attempted to protest. "That's not—" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. "That's not a business arrangement. That's the only offer you're going to get." Hartley took another step forward. Evelyn held her ground. "I'm 43 years old, Miss Carter, and I've built a considerable fortune in mining and timber. I need a wife to manage my household and entertain business associates. You need financial security and someone to care for your father in his final days." He gestured around the cabin, at the patched walls and the sagging roof beam, at the poverty that clung to every surface like the dust. "What exactly are your other options?" Evelyn's throat felt tight. Because he was right, wasn't he? The neighboring ranchers had already made it clear they couldn't afford extra help, not with the drought making water scarce and feed expensive. The town had nothing for an unmarried woman past her prime. She'd turned 29 in October, ancient by frontier standards. And her father, Evie, Thomas Carter's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through her spiraling thoughts. Don't. She turned to look at him. His eyes, once the same sharp green as her own, had gone cloudy with sickness, but they held a clarity of purpose that made her chest ache. Don't sell yourself, he said, each word costing him. Not for me. Not for this. He waved a trembling hand at the cabin, at the land beyond. Hartley's got darkness in him. Seen it myself, years back. He won't stop at money. Hartley's expression never changed, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or the cold satisfaction of being accurately assessed and not caring. Your father's fever is talking, Hartley said smoothly. Perhaps we should let him rest while you and I discuss this more rationally. He moved toward the door, clearly expecting Evelyn to follow. She didn't. Get out, Evelyn said quietly. Hartley paused, one hand on the doorframe. I beg your pardon? I said get out. Evelyn's voice gained strength with each word. Take your papers and your arrangement and leave my property. For the first time, Hartley's composure slipped. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, the smoothness was gone from his voice. You're making a mistake, Miss Carter. A very expensive mistake. Then it's mine to make. Hartley's eyes went flat and cold. He refolded the paper with deliberate care, tucking it back into his jacket. September 30th. That's your deadline. After that, I'll bring the sheriff and a writ of seizure. Your father will die watching you lose everything, and you'll end up in a boarding house sewing other women's dresses for pennies. He tipped his hat, the gesture mocking. Think carefully about your pride, Miss Carter. It's expensive currency in hard country. He left, and the cabin felt both larger and emptier for his absence. Evelyn stood frozen, listening to his horse's hoofbeats fade down the mountain trail. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and willed them still. Good girl, her father whispered. Evelyn turned back to him, and the tears she'd been holding finally broke free. She knelt beside the bed, taking his skeletal hand in both of hers. Papa, I don't know what to do. You'll figure it. Thomas squeezed her fingers with what little strength he had left. You always do. Just promise me. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that seemed to shake his entire frame. When he could speak again, his voice was barely audible. Promise me you won't let that man near you. Darkness, Evie. Real darkness. I promise. He nodded, satisfied, and his eyes drifted closed. Within moments, his breathing had evened into the shallow rhythm of exhausted sleep. Evelyn sat back on her heels and looked around the cabin. Her mother's quilts, faded but still beautiful, hung from pegs on the wall. Her father's tools, carefully maintained even as his hands grew too weak to wield them, stood in neat rows beside the door. 29 years of life in this place, births and deaths, laughter and grief, all of it compressed into these four walls and the land beyond. September 30th, 26 days. She stood and walked to the door, stepping out into the brutal heat of late afternoon. The sky had turned the color of a bruise, purple-black smoke obscuring the sun. The smell of burning pine was stronger now, carried on what little wind stirred the air. In the distance, she could see the glow of active flames on the next ridge over. Everything's burning, she thought. Everything's already burning, and I'm just standing here watching. That night, she sat beside her father's bed with her mother's old Bible open in her lap, not reading it, just holding it, letting the weight of it anchor her. Thomas slept fitfully, occasionally calling out names Evelyn didn't recognize, fragments of memories from before she was born. The heat never broke. Even with both windows open and the door propped wide, the cabin felt like a kiln. Evelyn's dress clung to her back, damp with sweat. She'd pinned her dark hair up, but strands kept escaping, sticking to her neck and forehead. Somewhere past midnight, she finally dozed off, her head dropping forward onto her chest. The sound of hoofbeats woke her just after dawn. Evelyn jerked upright, her heart hammering. For one terrible moment, she thought Hartley had returned. But when she stumbled to the door, squinting against the early light, the rider approaching was different, taller, broader through the shoulders, sitting his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. He reined in 20 feet from the cabin, raising one hand in a gesture that was more question than greeting. "Miss Carter?" Evelyn's hand went to the rifle beside the door, not lifting it but making sure it was close. "Who's asking?" "Name's Caleb Rowan." He swung down from his horse with the stiffness of someone who'd been riding for days. Up close, Evelyn could see he was older than she'd first thought, maybe 40, with deep lines around his eyes and a weathered quality to his face that spoke of hard years under an unforgiving sun. His clothes were worn but clean, his hat battered but well cared for. "I heard in town you might be in need of assistance." "What kind of assistance?" Rowan looked past her into the cabin, his gaze settling briefly on the figure in the bed before returning to her face. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and direct in a way that felt more honest than invasive. "The permanent kind, if you're willing to hear an unconventional proposal." Evelyn's grip on the doorframe tightened. "If this is about marriage, It's about partnership," Rowan interrupted quietly. "I need help. You need help. Maybe we can help each other." There was something in his voice, a weariness that matched her own, a recognition of desperation that didn't sound like exploitation. Evelyn hesitated, then stepped back from the door. "You can water your horse at the trough," she said. "Then you can say your piece. But I'm not promising anything." Rowan nodded, leading his mount to the weathered trough beside the cabin. Evelyn watched him move, noting the careful way he handled the animal, the gentleness in hands that looked like they could break stone. He was tall, taller than Hartley, but without the same aggressive presence. His shoulders were broad but slightly hunched, as if he'd spent too long carrying weight he couldn't set down. When he came back, she'd brought out 2 cups of water, all she could spare with the well running low. He took his with a grateful nod and drank half before speaking. "I have a ranch in the Tobacco Root Valley," he said, 40 miles west of here, up in the high country. Good water, good grass, protected from the worst of the fires. He paused, turning the cup in his hands. "I also have 3 daughters. No wife, no mother, just me and 3 girls who need someone to help them remember how to be a family." Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "What happened to their mother?" "Died 2 years ago. Childbirth complications with the youngest." Rowan's voice was matter-of-fact, but Evelyn heard the grief underneath, carefully controlled and deeply buried. "I've tried hiring help. Nobody stays. Either they can't handle the isolation, or they get other ideas about their position in the household, or they just realize there are easier ways to earn a living than managing 3 grieving children and a man who doesn't know how to be a father. And a mother. Both." "How old are they?" "Your daughters." "Margaret just turned 14, Catherine's 11, and Lily—" He smiled slightly, the first crack in his weathered composure. "Lily's 2.5, and she's more than the other 2 combined." Evelyn found herself almost smiling back. Almost. "Why come to me? You don't know me." "I know you turned down Samuel Hartley 3 days ago." Rowan met her eyes steadily. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Hartley owns half the businesses in 3 counties, and he doesn't take rejection well. You could have had comfort and security, and you chose poverty and uncertainty instead. That's either foolishness or principle, and looking at you now—" He gestured at the cabin, at the careful way she'd maintained what little they had, at the evidence of her bedside vigil. "I don't think you're foolish. I might be desperate enough to be both." "Then we're well matched." Rowan finished his water and set the cup down carefully. "I'm offering marriage, Miss Carter, but not the kind Hartley proposed. I need a partner, not a possession. Someone to help raise my daughters, manage the household, be a presence in their lives that isn't haunted by grief. In exchange, I can offer financial security, a good home, and—" He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Respect. I won't demand what you're not willing to give. This would be a practical arrangement, not a romantic one." Evelyn's throat felt tight. "How practical, specifically?" "Separate rooms unless and until you choose otherwise. Your decisions regarding the household and the girls would have equal weight to mine. Any money beyond basic expenses would be managed jointly." Rowan pulled a folded paper from his pocket, not legal documents like Hartley's, but something handwritten. "I took the liberty of having my neighbor, who's also the local notary, draft a contract outlining the terms. You're welcome to review it and suggest modifications. Evelyn took the paper with trembling fingers and read it in the strengthening morning light. It was exactly what he'd described, a marriage contract that protected both parties, outlined responsibilities and rights, and included provisions for dissolution should either party find the arrangement untenable. At the bottom was a line item that made her breath catch. Bank draft for medical expenses and end-of-life care. $400 to be provided upon signing. $400, she whispered. Your father deserves to die with dignity, Rowan said quietly. That's enough for a doctor, proper medicine, and a decent burial when the time comes. Plus some left over to give you breathing room while you adjust to a new life. Evelyn looked up at him, searching his face for the catch, the hidden price. What do you get out of this? Truly? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with honesty. I get to stop watching my daughters disappear a little more each day. Margaret's so busy being angry she's forgotten how to be young. Catherine's so busy being good she's forgotten how to ask for what she needs. And Lily, his jaw tightened. Lily's learning to talk, and she doesn't have a mother to teach her the words for soft things, for gentle things. I can give them food and shelter and safety, but I can't give them what they've lost. Maybe you can't either, but maybe together we can give them something close enough to keep them whole. Behind her, Evelyn heard her father stir, the wet rattle of his breathing filling the cabin. She thought about Hartley's cold smile, about the deadline ticking closer every day, about the fires creeping down from the high country and the drought turning everything to dust. She thought about 3 motherless girls in a valley 40 miles away, learning to live with an absence so profound it had its own gravity. I have conditions, she said. Rowan straightened slightly. Name them. I stay with my father until the end, however long that takes. Done. I can bring a wagon, help transport him to better quarters if he's able to travel. If not, I'll wait. The money for his care goes directly to the doctor and to me. Not through you. Agreed. And your daughters, Evelyn chose her next words carefully. I won't try to replace their mother. That's not possible and it's not right. But I also won't accept being treated as hired help in my own home. If we do this, I'm their stepmother. That comes with authority and respect, whether they like it or not. Rowan's expression softened slightly. They're grieving, Miss Carter. They might not make it easy. I don't expect easy, Evelyn said. I expect honest. Can you promise me that? That you and your daughters will be honest with me, even when it's hard? Yes. No hesitation. Evelyn looked down at the contract again, at the careful handwriting that outlined a marriage built on necessity rather than affection. It should have felt like surrender. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in months. I need to think about it, she said. Give me until tomorrow. Rowan nodded, collecting his hat. I'll be at the boarding house in town. Send word when you've decided. He paused at his horse, one hand on the saddle. Miss Carter? I know this isn't the life you probably imagined for yourself. It's not what I imagined either. But sometimes the life we get is better than the one we planned for, even when it comes in the hardest wrapping. He rode away, and Evelyn stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared into the smoke-hazy distance. Evie? Her father's voice was stronger than it had been in days. Who was that? She turned to find him propped up on one elbow, his eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. She told him everything, about Rowan's proposal, the contract, the $400, the 3 motherless girls waiting in a valley she'd never seen. When she finished, Thomas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he lay back against the pillows and closed his eyes. Your mother would have liked that, he said. The honest part. She always said honesty was the only currency worth having in hard country. Is that a yes? It's a trust your gut, which is the same thing. He opened his eyes and looked at her with something that might have been relief. You're going to be all right, Evie. Better than all right. You're going to be exactly who those girls need you to be. That night, Evelyn barely slept. She read the contract a dozen times, examining every clause, looking for loopholes or hidden costs. She found none. Either Caleb Rowan was exactly what he appeared to be, a desperate father looking for help, or he was the most patient con man in Montana. Her gut said to trust him. Her gut had never steered her wrong. At first light, she walked the 3 miles to town, the contract folded in her pocket and her decision made. She found Rowan at the boarding house eating a sparse breakfast of coffee and cornbread. When he saw her expression, he stood slowly, his face carefully neutral. "Yes," Evelyn said simply. The relief that crossed Rowan's face was so profound it almost hurt to witness. He pulled the bank draft from his pocket, already filled out, already signed, and pressed it into her hands. "We can marry today if you're willing," he said. "The circuit judge is due through town this afternoon, or we can wait if you need time." Evelyn thought about her father, lying in that overheated cabin, counting down his final days. She thought about Hartley and his deadline, about the fires and the drought and the weight of trying to carry everything alone. "Today," she said, "but at my father's bedside. I want him there." "Of course." They married 4 hours later in the cabin that had been Evelyn's entire world. The judge, a kind-faced woman named Ruth Hendricks, performed the brief ceremony with Evelyn's father as witness. Thomas Carter cried, and Evelyn pretended not to notice. Rowan signed the contract with a steady hand, and Evelyn signed below him, making it real. Afterward, the judge pulled Evelyn aside while Rowan stepped outside to give them privacy. "That's a good man," Judge Hendricks said quietly. "I've known Caleb Rowan for 15 years. He's honest to a fault, and he loves those girls more than his own life. But he's drowning, child. He needs help, and he's too proud to ask for it in any way except this." She squeezed Evelyn's hand. "Be patient with him. He'll be patient with you." Then she was gone, and it was just Evelyn and her father and the man who was now her husband. "I'll bring the wagon tomorrow," Rowan said from the doorway. "We'll take our time getting back. No sense pushing your father beyond his strength." "Thank you." Rowan nodded and moved to leave, then paused. "Miss Carter, Mrs. Rowan, I know this is strange, but I'm grateful for all of it." After he left, Evelyn sat beside her father's bed and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just done. She'd married a stranger, committed herself to a life in a place she'd never seen, with 3 children who might hate her for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. "Smart choice," her father said, reading her thoughts the way he always had. "That's what real partnership looks like. People who need each other admitting it out loud." The next morning, Rowan arrived with a wagon fitted with canvas cover and a mattress laid across the bed, carefully arranged to provide as much comfort as possible. He lifted Thomas Carter with surprising gentleness, settling him among blankets and pillows like precious cargo. They left at midday, the wagon rolling slowly down the mountain trail. Evelyn sat up front beside Rowan, watching her childhood home disappear behind them. The smoke was thicker now, the fires closer. By nightfall, she thought, flames would probably reach the cabin. Let them. That life was over. Rowan didn't try to make conversation, and Evelyn was grateful. They rode in companionable silence, the only sounds the creak of wagon wheels, the jingle of harness, and her father's occasional cough from behind them. The country changed as they climbed higher, from dry grassland to pine forest, from open sky to dappled shade. The air grew thinner and cleaner, sharp with the scent of sage and cedar. Water appeared in thin streams that cut through granite, and Evelyn realized with a start that she could hear birds. She hadn't heard birds in weeks. They stopped twice to rest the horses and give Thomas water. Both times Rowan moved with quiet efficiency, checking the harness, adjusting the load, making sure everything was secure. He moved like someone who'd spent his whole life solving practical problems. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. "How much farther?" Evelyn asked as they prepared to move again. "We'll reach the valley by nightfall," Rowan said. "There's a line cabin about 2 hours ahead if your father needs to rest longer." "He's holding up better than I expected." Rowan glanced back at the wagon bed where Thomas had fallen into a dozing sleep. "Hard men die hard. That's what my father used to say." They reached the line cabin as the sun began its long descent toward the western peaks. It was a small structure, barely more than a shed, but it was blessedly cool inside and protected from the wind. Rowan made a fire while Evelyn tended to her father, and they shared a sparse meal of dried meat and hardtack. "Tell me about your daughters," Evelyn said as darkness fell outside. "Really tell me, Not just their names and ages. Rowan was quiet for a long time, staring into the small fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. Margaret is the oldest, and she carries it like a cross. She was 12 when her mother died, old enough to understand and young enough to be destroyed by it. She tried to step into Sarah's role, tried to mother the younger two, tried to run the house, tried to be everything we'd lost. I let her do it because I didn't know how to stop her, and because— He paused, swallowing hard. Because it was easier than facing how much I'd failed them. You didn't fail them, Evelyn said quietly. I did. I do. Every day. Rowan's hands clenched into fists on his knees. Catherine's the middle child, and she spent 2 years trying to be invisible. She's convinced that if she's good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, she can keep what's left of our family from breaking apart. She doesn't cry, she doesn't complain, she just disappears into herself a little more each day. And Lily? Rowan's expression softened. Lily's pure light. She doesn't remember her mother. She was 6 months old when Sarah died. All she knows is the world as it is now, and somehow that makes her the happiest person I've ever met. She laughs at everything, chases chickens, tries to help with everything, and succeeds at nothing. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The other two resent her for it sometimes, I think, for not carrying the grief they can't put down. Evelyn absorbed this, picturing 3 girls she'd never met, one drowning in responsibility, one drowning in silence, one floating blissfully above it all. They're going to hate me, she said. It wasn't a question. Probably, Rowan agreed. For a while. Margaret will see you as a threat to her position. Catherine will be too scared to trust you. And Lily, he shrugged. Lily will love you immediately and completely, which might be worse. Why worse? Because it'll make the other two resent you even more. They fell silent again. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant rain. The first rain Evelyn had smelled in months. I don't know how to be a mother, she admitted. I don't know how to be a father, Rowan countered. Maybe not knowing is what makes us honest. They set out again at first light, and by late morning they'd climbed into country so beautiful it made Evelyn's chest ache. The valley opened below them, a long sweep of grassland hemmed in by mountains, threaded with silver streams. At the far end, tucked against the base of a massive granite cliff, stood a house. Not a cabin, a house. 2 stories built from local timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and smoke curling from not 1, but 2 chimneys. Barns and outbuildings clustered nearby, and Evelyn could see cattle grazing in distant pastures, horses in a corral, chickens scratching in the yard. You said you were poor, she said, her voice tight. Rowan had the grace to look embarrassed. I said I needed help. I never said I was poor. You let me think. I let you draw your own conclusions, Rowan interrupted gently. If I'd told you the truth up front, you would have wondered what was wrong with me, that I couldn't keep hired help. You would have questioned my motives, and you would have been right to. He met her eyes squarely. I'm not offering you wealth, Mrs. Rowan. I'm offering you work and responsibility and 3 damaged children who need more than I can give them alone. The fact that the house is bigger than a cabin doesn't change that. Evelyn wanted to be angry. Instead, she found herself almost laughing. You're a manipulative man, Mr. Rowan. I'm a desperate father, he corrected. There's a difference. As they descended into the valley, Evelyn saw movement on the porch, 3 small figures emerging to watch their approach. Even from a distance, she could read their body language. One stood with arms crossed, defensive and furious. One hung back in the shadows, barely visible. And one, the smallest, came running down the path, pigtails flying, arms outstretched. Papa! The shriek was pure joy. Rowan brought the wagon to a stop and jumped down just in time to catch the little girl who launched herself at him. He swung her up with practiced ease, and she wrapped her arms around his neck like she'd never let go. I missed you, I missed you, I missed you, Lily chanted, each word punctuated with a kiss to his weathered cheek. I missed you too, little bird. Rowan set her down carefully and turned to help Evelyn from the wagon seat. Lily, this is Mrs. Rowan. She's going to be staying with us now. Lily turned those enormous eyes on Evelyn, gray like her father's, but filled with uncomplicated delight. Are you my new mama? Evelyn's heart clenched. I'm your stepmother. That's a little different. Can I call you mama? Let's start with Evelyn and see how it goes. The older girls had approached now, and Evelyn got her first clear look at them. Margaret was tall for 14, all sharp angles and fierce green eyes and hair the color of honey, pulled back in a severe braid. She looked at Evelyn with naked hostility, taking in her travel-stained dress, her wind-burned face, her calloused hands. Papa, Margaret said, her voice flat. You actually did it. Margaret, Rowan's tone carried a warning. You bought a wife. Each word was precise, cutting, like ordering furniture from a catalog. That's enough. But Margaret wasn't finished. She looked Evelyn up and down one more time, her lip curling slightly. Welcome to the Rowan Ranch, Mrs. Rowan. I'm sure you'll be very comfortable here now that you've secured your financial future. She turned and walked back to the house, her spine rigid with fury. Catherine, a smaller, softer version of her older sister, gave Evelyn one quick, terrified glance before following Margaret inside. Lily, oblivious to the tension, grabbed Evelyn's hand. Come see my chickens! I have 7. Well, 6 now because one got eaten by a fox, but Papa says we can get more. Lily, let Mrs. Rowan breathe, Rowan said, but his voice was gentle. He moved to the back of the wagon, carefully lifting Thomas Carter into his arms. Let's get your father settled first, and then you can give her the grand tour. The house was even more impressive inside. High ceilings, real wood floors, furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. Someone had tried to keep it clean, but there was a hollowness to it, a sense of a place that had forgotten how to be lived in instead of merely inhabited. Rowan carried Thomas to a downstairs bedroom that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The bed was freshly made, though, and there was water in the pitcher on the nightstand. Margaret prepared it, Rowan said quietly, seeing Evelyn's surprise. She's angry, but she's not cruel. Could have fooled me, Evelyn muttered. She spent the rest of the day settling her father, unpacking her few belongings, and trying to navigate a house that felt simultaneously too large and too small. Margaret avoided her entirely. Catherine watched from doorways but fled if Evelyn looked directly at her. And Lily followed her everywhere, chattering in an endless stream about chickens and cats, and the time she saw a bear, and did Evelyn want to see her favorite rock? By evening, Evelyn's head was pounding. She'd just gotten her father settled for the night when she heard raised voices from upstairs, Margaret and Rowan arguing behind a closed door. Can't just replace her? I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm trying to give you all a chance at something better than this half-life we've been living. We were fine. You were dying inside, all of you, and I didn't know how to stop it. Silence. Then, quieter. I hate you. I know, you can hate me and still give her a chance. Why should I? Because she gave up everything to be here. Because she's the first person in 2 years who's been brave enough to walk into our grief and not run away. Because, a long pause. Because your mother would want you to try. The sound of a door slamming, footsteps on the stairs, running. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall as Margaret stormed past, not even seeing her, and disappeared out the front door into the gathering dark. Rowan appeared at the top of the stairs, looking exhausted. When he saw Evelyn, he managed a weak smile. Welcome to the family, he said. It only gets more complicated from here. That night, Evelyn lay in a bedroom that wasn't hers, in a house full of strangers who shared her last name, and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of her new life. Footsteps in the hallway, the creak of floorboards overhead, wind moving through pine trees that grew so close to the house she could hear branches brushing against the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, and another answered. Her father slept in the room below hers, his breathing audible through the old floorboards, that wet rattle that had become the rhythm of her days. She'd checked on him twice already, unable to shake the habit of constant vigilance even though exhaustion pulled at her bones like lead weights. The bedroom Rowan had given her was at the far end of the second floor, separated from his own by the full length of the hallway and the girls' rooms between. The message was clear. Privacy, distance, separate lives under one roof. The room itself was simple but well made, a sturdy bed with a patchwork quilt, a wardrobe that smelled of cedar, a washstand with a basin and pitcher decorated with faded blue flowers. Someone had left wildflowers in a jar on the nightstand, and Evelyn suspected Lily. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt like she'd stepped off a cliff and was still waiting to hit the ground. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and restless. She woke before dawn to the sound of a child crying, not Lily's high, clear wail, but something more muffled, more desperate. Evelyn pulled on her wrapper and stepped into the hallway, following the sound to the middle bedroom. Catherine sat on her bed with her knees pulled to her chest, rocking slightly, her face buried in her arms. She didn't seem to hear Evelyn in the doorway. "Catherine?" Evelyn kept her voice soft. The girl's head snapped up, and for a moment her face was naked with grief, raw and young and completely devastated. Then the mask slammed back into place, and she wiped her eyes with quick, furious movements. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Please go away." "You don't sound fine." "I don't need—" Catherine's voice broke. She tried again. "I don't need anything. Please." Evelyn hesitated, caught between retreat and advance. Every instinct said to give the child space, but something in Catherine's rigid posture, the way she held herself like broken glass trying not to cut anyone, made Evelyn stay. "I'm not going to tell you everything's all right," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm not going to say it gets easier, or that time heals, or any of those things people say when they don't know what else to offer. I'm just going to sit here for a minute if that's acceptable to you." She lowered herself to the floor outside Catherine's doorway, her back against the wall, making herself small and unthreatening. The girl watched her with wide, suspicious eyes. "Why?" Catherine asked finally. "Because I remember what it's like to cry alone and wish someone would notice." Evelyn pulled her wrapper tighter around her shoulders. "And because you shouldn't have to be so good all the time. It's exhausting." Catherine's face crumpled. "If I'm not good, everything falls apart." "Sweet girl, everything's already apart. Being good won't hold it together." "You don't understand." Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "Margaret's so angry, and Lily needs so much, and Papa tries but he doesn't know how, and I have to, you have to be perfect so no one else breaks," Evelyn finished. "I know. I did the same thing when my mother died." Catherine looked up, startled. "You did?" "For 3 years. I was 13. I thought if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, my father wouldn't notice how much we'd both lost." Evelyn smiled without humor. "It didn't work. He noticed anyway. And I made myself so small trying to hold everything together that I almost forgot how to be anything else." "What did you do?" "Eventually, I got angry, started breaking dishes on purpose, talked back, made messes." Evelyn met Catherine's eyes steadily. "It was the only way I could prove to myself I was still real." Catherine was quiet for a long time, processing this. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft, Evelyn almost missed it. "I don't know how to be angry. I only know how to be scared." "Then be scared," Evelyn said. "Be scared and sad and whatever else you need to be. I promise the world won't end. Margaret says you're only here for the money." "Margaret's entitled to her opinion. Is that what you think?" Catherine studied her for a long moment, those serious gray eyes, so like her father's, searching Evelyn's face for deception. "I don't know yet," she said finally, "but I think maybe you're sad too, like us." "I am," Evelyn admitted. "My father's dying downstairs, and I just married a man I don't know to save us both. I'm terrified and exhausted, and I have no idea what I'm doing here. So yes, I'm sad. Very sad." "Does that make it easier? That we're all sad together?" "I don't know. Ask me again in a month." The corner of Catherine's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She uncurled slightly, her shoulders dropping from their rigid line. "I should try to sleep," she said. "Papa says we have chores early. Then I'll let you rest." Evelyn pushed herself to her feet, her joints protesting after sitting on the cold floor. At the door, she paused. "Catherine, you don't have to trust me, but you also don't have to be alone with everything you're carrying. That's what I'm here for, whether your sister believes it or not." She left before the girl could respond, but she heard the quiet sound of Catherine settling back into bed and thought maybe the crying had stopped. Downstairs, she checked on her father, still sleeping, his breathing slightly easier than it had been. and found her way to the kitchen as the first gray light began filtering through the windows. The room was large and well-appointed, with a cast-iron stove that radiated gentle heat and shelves lined with preserved goods that spoke of careful preparation for long winters. Evelyn had just gotten a fire going when Rowan appeared in the doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make myself useful." Evelyn reached for the coffee pot. "Where do you keep—" "Top shelf, left side. There's a grinder in the drawer below." Rowan moved past her to wash his hands at the pump sink, careful not to crowd her space. "You don't have to do this. Margaret usually handles breakfast." "I heard her leave about an hour ago. Sounded like she was heading for the barn." Rowan's jaw tightened. "She does that when she's angry, works herself into exhaustion rather than talk about it." "Wonder where she gets that from," Evelyn said mildly. Rowan had the grace to look chagrined. He dried his hands and leaned against the counter, watching as Evelyn measured coffee with the ease of long practice. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it carried weight. Two people learning the geography of a shared space. "Catherine was crying earlier," Evelyn said as she set the coffee to boil. "I didn't know if you wanted to know." "I always want to know." Rowan's voice was rough. "She lets me see it so rarely that when she does, it feels like a gift I don't deserve." "I told her she didn't have to be good all the time." "How did she take that?" "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped." Evelyn turned to face him, crossing her arms over her chest. "Mr. Rowan, I need you to understand something. I don't know how to be a mother. I barely know how to be a wife. And what I do know comes from watching my parents, who loved each other in ways I don't think we're going to replicate. But I'm a quick study, and I don't quit easily. And I will do my damnedest to help those girls if you give me the room to figure it out. What do you need from me? Honestly, I need you to stop apologizing for them. Margaret's anger is valid, Catherine's fear is real, and Lily's—" Evelyn paused, searching for the right words. "Lily's joy is going to make the other two feel guilty until they understand they're allowed to feel it too. That's not something you can fix by managing everyone's emotions. You just have to let them be messy and trust they'll find their way through." Rowan absorbed this, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. I've been trying to smooth everything over for so long I forgot that's not the same as healing. It's not your job to make them happy. It's your job to make them safe enough to be unhappy when they need to be." "Did you read that in a book?" "No. I learned it from watching my father let me rage at the world after my mother died. Hardest thing he ever did, I think, just sitting there and absorbing my anger without trying to fix it or make it smaller." Evelyn's throat tightened at the memory. "But it saved me. Let me burn through the worst of it until I could find solid ground again." The coffee began to boil, filling the kitchen with its bitter, familiar scent. Evelyn poured 2 cups, handing one to Rowan. He took it with a grateful nod. "Your father's lucky to have you," he said. "He's dying. Luck doesn't enter into it." "Still, most daughters wouldn't have—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "You gave up a lot to be here." "I gave up nothing I wanted to keep." Evelyn sipped her coffee, letting the heat anchor her. The cabin was just wood and nails. The land was already burning, and staying there alone after he's gone would have been its own kind of dying. At least here I have a purpose. 3 purposes, Rowan corrected with a faint smile. 4, if you count me. "Do you need counting?" "Probably. I'm fairly useless at domestic matters beyond basic cooking and making sure nobody dies of neglect." They fell into companionable silence, drinking their coffee as the kitchen slowly brightened with the rising sun. Through the window, Evelyn could see the valley coming to life, mist rising off the streams, cattle moving toward water, the mountains turning from black to purple to gold as light crept down their flanks. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Sarah chose the location. Said she wanted somewhere we could see the whole world, but the world couldn't see us." Rowan's voice carried the gentle reverence of old grief, well-worn and carefully tended. "She was right. You can stand on the ridge behind the house and see 3 counties, but good luck finding this valley if you don't already know it's here. Tell me about her, if you want to." Rowan was quiet for so long Evelyn thought he might refuse. Then he set down his cup and seemed to gather himself. She was practical, he said finally. Not romantic or sentimental, but practical in ways that made everything easier. She could look at a problem and strip it down to what mattered, solve it efficiently, and move on. Made her an excellent rancher's wife, he paused. Made her a challenging person to be married to sometimes, because she didn't suffer foolishness, and she didn't pretend things were fine when they weren't. The girls get that from her. All except Lily, who got my tendency to see the best in everything, even when it's burning down around me. Rowan's smile was sad. Sarah died the way she lived, efficiently, without drama. The midwife said she knew within an hour of Lily's birth that something was wrong internally, but she never let on. Just kept giving instructions about the baby's care, making sure everyone knew what to do, organizing her own death like it was another household task that needed managing. Evelyn felt her chest constrict. How long did she have? 3 days. By the second day, she couldn't get out of bed. By the third, she couldn't stay conscious for more than a few minutes at a time. Rowan's hands tightened around his cup. I sat there holding her hand and begging her to fight, and she looked at me like I was being particularly stupid. Fighting won't change the outcome, she said. Just make sure the girls remember to laugh. Then she closed her eyes and didn't open them again. That's why you came to find me, Evelyn said quietly. Because they forgot how to laugh. Margaret hasn't laughed in 2 years. Not once. Catherine laughs, but it's... He struggled for words. It's performative. Like she's playing a role. And Lily laughs at everything because she doesn't know any different, which somehow makes it worse. The back door opened and Margaret appeared, her clothes dust-covered and her face flushed from exertion. She stopped short when she saw Evelyn and her father together in the kitchen, something flickering across her expression too fast to read. I fed the horses, she said to Rowan, pointedly ignoring Evelyn. The roan mare's got a stone bruise. I poulticed it, but you should check it later. Thank you. Did you eat? I'm not hungry. Margaret, I said I'm not hungry. She turned on her heel and headed for the stairs, then paused with one hand on the banister. I'm going to get Catherine up for chores. Unless you want your new wife to handle that too? The words hung in the air like smoke. Rowan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Evelyn spoke. Actually, I'd appreciate your help this morning, she said calmly. I don't know your routines yet, and I'd rather learn them right than stumble through on my own. Margaret turned slowly, her green eyes sharp with suspicion. You want my help. I want to not make a fool of myself. If that requires your assistance, then yes. Why should I help you? Because you love your father, and you want this household to run smoothly, and the fastest way to achieve that is to teach me what I need to know. Evelyn met the girl's hostile gaze without flinching. You can hate me and still help me, Margaret. They're not mutually exclusive. For a long moment, the girl just stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of her mouth twitched. Fine, she said, but don't expect me to make it easy. I wouldn't dream of it. Margaret disappeared upstairs and Rowan let out a long breath. That went better than I expected. She's testing boundaries, Evelyn said. Seeing how much cruelty I'll tolerate before I either break or fight back. It's smart, actually. Shows she's thinking strategically. I'm not sure I like you analyzing my daughter like a military campaign. Would you prefer I take it personally and spend the next month in tears? Rowan smiled despite himself. No, I suppose tactical assessment is better than emotional devastation. The morning unfolded in a careful dance of instruction and observation. Margaret showed Evelyn the routines. When to gather eggs, how much feed for the chickens, where the fresh milk got strained and stored, which vegetables needed picking from the kitchen garden. She delivered each piece of information with clinical precision, waiting for Evelyn to fumble or forget. But Evelyn had spent enough years managing a household to absorb new patterns quickly. Catherine appeared halfway through, still quiet and watchful, but she didn't flee when Evelyn spoke to her. Instead, she took over showing Evelyn how to work the butter churn, her small hands demonstrating the rhythm with practiced ease. Mama used to let me do this, she said softly. Said I had the right touch for it. You do, Evelyn agreed. I can never get the consistency right. Too soft or too hard, never just perfect the way this is. Catherine's face brightened slightly. Really? You're not just saying that? I'm terrible at butter. Ask my father. He used to complain about it constantly. A small smile tugged at Catherine's mouth. How's he doing? Your father? The same. Better than yesterday, which is all I can hope for right now. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron. Would you like to meet him? He's awake, and I know he'd appreciate the company. Catherine hesitated, glancing at Margaret, who had paused in her work to listen. I don't want to bother him. You won't be. He likes young people. Says they remind him the world keeps turning, even when everything feels like it's ending. They went together to the downstairs bedroom, Catherine hanging back slightly as Evelyn opened the door. Thomas Carter was propped up against the pillows, looking frail but alert. His eyes brightened when he saw Evelyn. There's my girl, he said, his voice thin but warm. Thought you'd forgotten about me already. Never. I brought someone to meet you. Evelyn gestured Catherine forward. Papa, this is Catherine Rowan. Catherine, this is my father, Thomas Carter. Catherine stepped closer, her eyes wide. Hello, sir. Well, hello yourself. Thomas studied her with the gentle curiosity of someone who'd spent his life reading people. You have kind eyes, Miss Catherine. That's rarer than you'd think. Catherine flushed with pleasure. Thank you. Are you? She stopped, biting her lip. Am I dying? Yes, slowly and with remarkably little grace. Thomas's smile was wry. But I'm not dead yet, and I'd appreciate the company of a lovely young lady, if you have time to spare. What should I talk about? Anything you like. Tell me about this place. I've only seen it from the wagon, and I'd like to know where my daughters landed. Catherine settled into the chair beside the bed, and to Evelyn's surprise, began talking. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She described the valley, the seasons, the way snow filled the high country and turned everything to crystal, how the streams ran so cold in spring they could numb your hands in seconds. She talked about the horses, about her favorite hiding spots in the barn, about the time she'd found a nest of baby rabbits and tried to raise them by hand. They died anyway, she said sadly. Papa said wild things usually do when you try to tame them. Your papa's a wise man, Thomas said. Some things need their freedom more than they need safety. Evelyn left them talking and went to find Rowan, who was in the barn replacing a broken section of fence rail. He looked up when she approached, wiping sweat from his forehead. Everything all right? Catherine's with my father. They're getting along well. Evelyn leaned against the fence post, watching him work. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Rowan set down his hammer. All right. How sick are you willing to let me be when he dies? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He studied her face for a long moment. As sick as you need to be, for as long as it takes. Even if it's inconvenient? Even if it means I can't function for weeks? Even then, Rowan's voice was firm. I didn't marry you expecting you to be some kind of unfeeling automaton. You're human. You're allowed to break. Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen, a tension she hadn't fully recognized until it eased. Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency. You'd be surprised how rare it is. They worked together in companionable silence, Rowan repairing fence while Evelyn learned the geography of the outbuildings. The ranch was larger than she'd realized, not just the main house and barn, but a smokehouse, a root cellar, a chicken coop, a separate building for dairy operations, and what looked like hired hands' quarters, currently empty. You really do need help, she observed. I wasn't exaggerating when I said nobody stays. We've had 6 different hired men in 2 years. They all leave within a month. Why? Rowan grimaced. Margaret runs them off, mostly. She's very efficient at making people feel unwelcome when she decides she doesn't want them here. And you let her? The first time I thought it was a fluke. The second time I realized it was deliberate. After that, he shrugged helplessly. I didn't know how to make her stop without addressing why she was doing it, and I didn't know how to address that without breaking her open worse than she already was. So you've been running this whole operation yourself for 2 years. Catherine helps, and Margaret, when she's not actively sabotaging things. Rowan hammered in the last nail with more force than necessary. It's not sustainable, I know that, but I couldn't figure out any other solution that didn't involve forcing my grieving daughter to confront things she wasn't ready to face. You're a good father, Evelyn said quietly. Probably too good for your own welfare. Sarah would have figured it out. She always did. Sarah's not here. You are, and you're doing the best you can with impossible circumstances. Rowan looked at her, something unreadable in his gray eyes. You're very kind, considering I essentially trapped you into this situation. You gave me an option when I had none. That's not trapping, that's rescue, even if the form is unconventional. Evelyn pushed away from the fence post. I should get back. My father tires easily, and I don't want Catherine to feel abandoned with him. But when she returned to the house, she found Catherine still sitting beside Thomas's bed, and her father was asleep with a slight smile on his weathered face. Catherine looked up when Evelyn entered, and there were tears on her cheeks. He told me about your mother, she whispered. How she used to sing while she worked, and how the house felt empty without music after she died. He said you didn't sing for 3 years, and then one day you just started again, and he knew you were going to be all right. Evelyn's throat tightened. I didn't know he remembered that. He said it's his favorite memory, the day the music came back. Catherine stood, wiping her eyes with quick, self-conscious movements. Do you still sing? Sometimes, when I think nobody's listening. Maybe. Catherine hesitated. Maybe someday you could sing where we can hear, not now, but someday. Maybe, Evelyn agreed softly. The days that followed established a fragile rhythm. Evelyn rose before dawn to tend to her father, then joined the household routines under Margaret's critical instruction. The girl never missed an opportunity to point out Evelyn's shortcomings. Bread that didn't rise enough, vegetables cut wrong, sheets hung crooked on the line. But Evelyn bore it with patient grace, learning quickly and refusing to rise to the bait. Catherine remained watchful but gradually warmed, spending increasing amounts of time with Thomas, who seemed to draw energy from her quiet presence. He taught her card games, told her stories from his youth, and listened with genuine interest to her careful observations about the world around her. And Lily had decided within the first day that Evelyn was the most marvelous thing to ever enter her small universe. She followed Evelyn everywhere, chattering constantly, bringing her treasures ranging from interesting rocks to dead beetles to wildflowers with the roots still attached. For you, she'd announced solemnly, presenting each offering like it was made of gold. Evelyn accepted them all with equal seriousness, finding jars for the flowers and special boxes for the rocks. Lily's joy was uncomplicated and absolute, and while Evelyn could see how it grated on her older sisters, this child who didn't remember their mother, who loved so freely and expected love in return, she couldn't help but find it healing. You spoil her, Margaret said one afternoon, watching Lily convince Evelyn to play an elaborate game involving chickens and a pretend castle. Probably, Evelyn agreed. But she's 2. Being spoiled is practically her job. She needs to learn boundaries. She will. Right now, she needs to learn that new people can be safe. Evelyn caught Lily as she came running over, swinging her up despite the protest in her back. Besides, when's the last time anyone in this house played just for the sake of playing? Margaret's face shuddered. We don't have time for playing. Everyone has time for playing. You've just convinced yourself otherwise. Evelyn set Lily down and stood, facing the older girl directly. Your mother told your father to make sure you remembered how to laugh. Right now, the only one laughing is Lily, and she does it alone. That's not what your mother wanted. Don't you dare, Margaret's voice went cold and sharp. Don't you dare tell me what my mother wanted. You didn't know her. You don't get to speak for her. You're right. I didn't know her, and I'm not trying to replace her. Evelyn kept her voice level despite Margaret's fury. But I know what dying parents want for their children, because I'm watching mine die right now. And I promise you, not a single one of them wants their kids to stop living because they're gone. Margaret stared at her for a long, awful moment. Then she turned and walked away, her spine rigid with rage. That night, Evelyn heard her crying, raw, broken sobs that seemed to tear themselves out of her chest. She stood outside Margaret's door for a long time, her hand raised to knock, but ultimately left the girl to her grief. Some pain needed to be private. Instead, she went downstairs to check on her father and found Rowan already there, sitting in the chair beside the bed. Thomas was asleep, his breathing labored but steady. Rowan looked up when she entered, and she could see exhaustion written in every line of his face. You should sleep, she said quietly. So should you. Touché. Evelyn settled into the other chair, and they sat together in the lamplight, two people keeping vigil over death's slow approach. After a while, Rowan spoke. "Margaret's crying again." "I heard." "Did you—" "I left her alone. Figured she'd earned the right to fall apart without an audience." Rowan nodded slowly. "That's good. That's right." He was quiet for another moment. "You said something to her this afternoon, about mothers and dying and laughing." "I shouldn't have. It was cruel." "It was true." Rowan's voice was rough. "Sarah did say that. Those were her exact last words. Make sure they remember how to laugh. I've spent 2 years trying to figure out how to honor that, and I've failed completely." "You haven't failed. You've just been surviving." Evelyn reached out, almost touching his hand before thinking better of it. "There's a difference between failing and not knowing how." "Is there?" "Yes. Failure requires giving up. You're still here, still trying. That's not failure." They sat in silence again, and this time Evelyn did take his hand, just a brief squeeze, acknowledgement and comfort, and shared understanding all wrapped in a simple gesture. Rowan's fingers tightened around hers for a moment before letting go. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming here, for staying, for not running when you saw what a mess we all are." "We're all a mess," Evelyn corrected. "I'm just better at hiding it. Are you? Because I've seen you checking on your father 6 times a day, barely eating, working yourself into exhaustion rather than sit still with what's coming. That's different. Is it?" Evelyn didn't have an answer for that. They sat together until Thomas stirred, his eyes opening briefly. He saw them both there and smiled, a small, knowing smile that suggested he understood more than they'd said aloud. "Good," he murmured. "You're talking. Keep talking. That's how you make a life together, one honest conversation at a time." Then he drifted back to sleep, and Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Because he was right, wasn't he? They were building something here in the darkness, brick by careful brick. Not romance, maybe not even friendship yet, but something real and solid that might hold when everything else fell apart. 2 weeks into her new life, a storm rolled down from the high country. Not the dry lightning of late summer, but real rain, heavy and sustained. It drummed on the roof, turned the yard to mud, and brought a coolness to the air that felt like absolution after weeks of relentless heat. Thomas's condition worsened with the weather change. His breathing became more labored, his lucid moments fewer and farther between. The doctor came, a gruff man named Morrison, who'd made the long ride up from the valley town, and confirmed what Evelyn already knew. "Days," he said quietly. "Maybe a week if he's stubborn. Keep him comfortable. That's all you can do now." Evelyn thanked him, paid him from the money Rowan had given her, and went back to her vigil. Catherine came to sit with her, and even Margaret appeared in the doorway, hovering but not leaving. "Can we help?" Catherine asked softly. "Just be here," Evelyn said. "He likes knowing the house is full of life." So they stayed, all 3 girls rotating through, reading aloud, talking quietly, bringing the sound of living into a room slowly filling with death. Lily climbed into bed beside Thomas, curling against his side like a small cat, and he managed to lift one trembling hand to stroke her hair. "Pretty bird," he whispered. "Bright little bird." On the 3rd day of rain, Thomas Carter opened his eyes with unusual clarity. He looked around the room, at Evelyn, at Rowan standing in the doorway, at the 3 girls who'd gathered without being asked. "This is good," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "This is a good place to end." "Evie?" "I'm here, Papa." "You're going to be all right. Better than all right." His eyes found Rowan. "You take care of her, and she'll take care of you. That's how this works." "Yes, sir," Rowan said quietly. Thomas smiled and closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, evened, and then, so gently it was almost imperceptible, stopped. The room held its breath. Then Lily, not understanding, tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. "Is he sleeping?" "Yes, sweetheart," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. "He's sleeping now." Margaret was the first to move, taking Lily's hand and leading her from the room. Catherine followed, glancing back once with eyes full of understanding and shared grief. Rowan stayed, one hand on Evelyn's shoulder as she sat beside her father's body, and felt the full weight of orphanhood settle onto her like stones. "Take your time," he said softly. "I'll handle everything else." And he did. While Evelyn sat with her father's body, numb and lost, Rowan arranged everything: the coffin, the burial plot on the ridge overlooking the valley, the simple service. He held her when she finally broke, her composure shattering like glass, and he didn't try to fix it or minimize it or make it smaller than it was. He just let her grieve. They buried Thomas Carter 3 days later on the ridge he'd never seen while living, under a sky scrubbed clean by rain and wind. The whole valley spread below them like a promise, green and gold and silver where the streams caught sunlight. Rowan had chosen the spot carefully, a place where granite broke through the soil and wildflowers grew in defiant clusters despite the thin earth. Evelyn stood at the graveside in her mother's black dress, altered hastily to fit, and felt nothing. The numbness had settled over her like fog, muffling everything until the world seemed to come from a great distance. She heard the words Rowan spoke. Simple, honest things about a man he'd barely known but respected anyway. But they didn't penetrate the gray walls surrounding her. Catherine stood close enough that their shoulders touched. Margaret kept Lily occupied several yards away, the little girl mercifully distracted by a butterfly that kept landing on nearby stones. The ranch hands Rowan had hired for the occasion, 2 weathered men from the valley town, filled in the grave with quiet efficiency, their shovels biting into earth with sounds that should have hurt but didn't. When it was done, everyone left except Evelyn. She stood there as the sun tracked across the sky, watching shadows lengthen across the raw earth, and tried to feel something beyond the terrible emptiness that had replaced her center. "He's really gone," she said to the silence. The words felt obvious, stupid, but saying them made them slightly more real. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and sage and distance. Somewhere down in the valley, cattle lowed. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals with lazy grace. The world continued turning, indifferent to the fact that Thomas Carter had stopped turning with it. Evelyn wasn't sure how long she stood there. Long enough that the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. Long enough that her legs ached and her throat burned with unshed tears that refused to fall. Finally, she felt a small hand slip into hers. She looked down to find Lily gazing up at her with those enormous gray eyes, her face serious in a way that seemed wrong for someone so young. "You're sad," Lily said. Not a question. "Yes." "Papa says it's okay to be sad. He says Mama's in the ground too, but she's also in the sky and in the trees and in us." Lily pointed at the fresh grave. "Is your Papa in the sky now?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "I hope so." "You can cry if you want. I won't tell anybody." Lily squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "Sometimes I cry about Mama even though I don't remember her. Catherine says that's okay." Something in Evelyn's chest cracked. Not breaking exactly, but fracturing just enough to let feelings seep back in. She knelt down, bringing herself level with Lily, and pulled the little girl into a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered. Lily hugged her back with the uncomplicated totality that only small children can manage, her arms tight around Evelyn's neck. They stayed that way until the tears finally came, not the racking sobs Evelyn had expected, but quiet, steady crying that felt more like release than devastation. When they finally walked back down to the house, Catherine was waiting on the porch. She didn't say anything, just fell into step beside them, and Evelyn understood it for what it was: solidarity, recognition, the acknowledgement of someone who knew this particular landscape of loss. Inside, Margaret had prepared a simple supper. She set plates on the table with sharp, efficient movements, her face carefully blank. But when Evelyn sat down, Margaret put an extra serving on her plate, more than anyone else got. And Evelyn recognized it as the only kind of comfort the girl knew how to offer. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly. Margaret's jaw tightened. She didn't respond, but she also didn't leave the table immediately after eating like she usually did. She sat there while Lily chattered about the butterfly, and Catherine picked at her food, and Rowan maintained a gentle, unobtrusive presence at the head of the table. After supper, Evelyn helped clear the dishes despite Margaret's protest. The work felt good, mindless, physical, occupying her hands while her mind tried to process everything it couldn't quite hold. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when Rowan appeared beside her with a drying cloth. "You don't have to," she said. "Neither do you, but here we are." He took a plate from the rinse basin and dried it with careful attention. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow." "All right, I will." They worked in silence for a while, the kitchen windows darkening as evening settled over the valley. Through the wall, Evelyn could hear Catherine reading to Lily, some story about a princess and a dragon that involved a lot of dramatic sound effects. "Thank you," Evelyn said finally, "for everything. The burial, the service, for being—" she struggled to find the right word. "Present. You've been very present through all of this." "I told you I would be." "Most men say things they don't mean. You're not most men." Rowan paused in his drying, considering this. "Sarah used to say I was too literal, that I took everything too seriously and needed to learn when people were just making conversation versus actually committing to something." He smiled slightly. "I never did figure out the difference, so I just assume everyone means what they say until proven otherwise. That must get exhausting. Constantly." He set the dried plate aside and reached for another. But it's simpler than trying to decode what people actually mean beneath what they're saying. Life's hard enough without adding that layer of complexity. Evelyn found herself almost smiling. "Your wife sounds like she was very patient with you." She was patient with everyone. It was her greatest strength and her greatest frustration, wanting people to be better than they were and being perpetually disappointed when they weren't. Rowan's voice carried fond exasperation. "She would have liked you, I think. You say what you mean too." "Not always. Sometimes I say nothing at all and hope people will just intuit what I need." "How's that working out for you?" "Terribly." This time Evelyn did smile, small and brief but real. "I'm working on it." They finished the dishes and Evelyn excused herself, suddenly exhausted in a way that went bone deep. She climbed the stairs to her room and found someone, Catherine probably, had turned down the bed and left fresh water in the pitcher. The small kindness nearly undid her again. She changed into her nightdress and sat at the window, looking out over the darkening valley. Tomorrow she would have to figure out how to exist in a world without her father in it. Tomorrow she would have to step fully into her role in this strange family that was hers by contract, if not yet by genuine connection. Tomorrow she would have to be functional and present and useful. But tonight she could sit in the darkness and let herself be nothing but grief. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams of her father calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach. She woke repeatedly, disoriented by the unfamiliar room, by the silence that was different from the silence she'd known in the cabin. Each time, it took longer to remember where she was and why her father's breathing no longer rattled through the floorboards. Dawn found her already dressed and moving through the house like a ghost. She made coffee, started breakfast, moved through the routines Margaret had taught her with mechanical precision. The girls appeared one by one. First Catherine, quiet and watchful, then Lily, sleepy and confused about why Evelyn was up so early, finally Margaret, her eyes red-rimmed in a way that suggested she'd spent the night crying too. "You don't have to do all this," Margaret said, watching Evelyn flip eggs with practiced efficiency. "We can manage." "I know you can. I need to do it anyway." Margaret absorbed this, then moved to help without being asked, setting the table, slicing bread, pouring milk for Lily. They worked in parallel, not quite together but not actively opposed either, and Evelyn recognized it as progress, however small. Rowan joined them as breakfast was finishing, and Evelyn noticed the way his gaze swept the table, cataloging everyone's state, Margaret's puffy eyes, Catherine's careful composure, Lily's innocent cheer, Evelyn's brittle functionality. He didn't comment on any of it, just ate his meal and helped clear the table afterward. The day stretched ahead, empty and infinite. Evelyn threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganizing cupboards, mending clothes, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. Margaret watched this frenzied activity with something that might have been recognition. "You're allowed to rest," the girl said finally, late in the afternoon when she found Evelyn attacking the pantry with a scrub brush. "I don't want to rest." "Resting isn't about wantoning. Sometimes it's about needing." Margaret crouched beside her. and Evelyn was startled to see genuine concern on the girl's face. When Mama died, I did this. Worked myself sick trying to prove I could handle everything she used to do. Papa finally made me stop by hiding all the cleaning supplies for a week. What did you do instead? Fell apart, screamed, broke things. Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact. Then I put myself back together and kept going, but I had to break first. You can't skip that part. I'm not good at breaking. Neither was I, still not. Margaret stood, offering her hand. Come on, there's something I want to show you. Evelyn let herself be pulled to her feet and led outside, across the yard and past the barn to a narrow trail that climbed steeply into the forest. They walked in silence, Margaret setting a punishing pace that left no breath for conversation. The trail switchbacked through dense pine, then broke suddenly into an open meadow. It was beautiful in a way that hurt, wildflowers rioting across the grass, aspen trees whispering at the edges, a small creek cutting through the middle with water so clear Evelyn could see every stone in its bed, and in the center of the meadow, carefully tended and protected by a low fence, stood a single grave marker. Sarah Rowan, beloved wife and mother. 1835-1872. I come here when everything gets too heavy, Margaret said quietly. When I'm so angry I could burn the world down, or so sad I can't remember why I'm still breathing. I come here and I tell her about it. She glanced at Evelyn. Sometimes I scream at her for leaving. Sometimes I just sit. Either way, it helps. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Why are you showing me this? Because you need somewhere to put it all. The grief, the anger, the unfairness of it. Margaret's voice was rough with her own barely controlled emotion. Your papa's buried on the ridge looking at the valley. Mine's buried in the meadow looking at the sky. Both of them are gone. Both of us are still here. And that's the hardest part, figuring out how to keep existing when the person who made existence make sense is just absent. They stood together in the meadow while the sun tracked slowly westward, two people joined by the particular loneliness that comes from losing a parent too soon. Finally, Margaret spoke again. I'm sorry I've been terrible to you. You haven't been terrible, you've been protecting yourself. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Margaret's jaw tightened. But I've been cruel when you didn't deserve it, and I'm sorry, you're not trying to replace my mother. I understand that now. You're just trying to survive your own loss while somehow helping us survive ours, and that's... She struggled for words. That's braver than I've been willing to acknowledge. Evelyn turned to look at the girl, really look at her, and saw past the anger and armor to the terrified child underneath. You're 14 years old, Margaret. You're allowed to be scared and angry and cruel sometimes. You're allowed to be a mess. But someone has to hold things together. Your father's holding things together. I'm holding things together. You're allowed to just be a girl who lost her mother too young. Margaret's face crumpled. She turned away, shoulders shaking with the force of trying to hold back sobs that demanded release. Evelyn gave her a moment, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the girl from behind. Margaret stiffened, then collapsed into the embrace with a broken sound that was half sob, half howl. She cried the way Evelyn imagined she'd needed to cry for 2 years, huge gulping sobs that seemed to tear themselves out of her chest, leaving her raw and gasping. Evelyn held her through all of it, offering nothing but presence and the solid reality of arms that wouldn't let go. When Margaret finally quieted, she stayed slumped against Evelyn, exhausted and wrung out. I miss her so much, Margaret whispered. Every single day I miss her, and it doesn't get smaller. It just gets more familiar. I know. Does it ever stop hurting? No, but you get stronger at carrying it. Evelyn loosened her grip slightly, giving Margaret room to pull away if she wanted. And eventually you find things that make the hurt worth carrying, moments of joy, or purpose, or connection. They don't replace what you've lost, but they make the loss bearable. Margaret straightened, wiping her eyes with fierce, self-conscious movements. Her face was blotchy and swollen, and she looked younger than she had since Evelyn arrived, stripped of the hard competence that usually armored her. We should get back, Margaret said. Catherine worries when I'm gone too long. They walked back together, and this time Margaret's pace was slower, almost companionable. When they emerged from the trees, They found Catherine sitting on the porch with Lily, both girls watching the trail with visible relief. "Where did you go?" Catherine asked, standing quickly. "Showed her mama's meadow," Margaret said simply. She needed to see it. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, then her gaze shifted to Evelyn with new understanding. "Oh, good, that's good." That evening, something in the household shifted. The tension that had strung everything tight since Evelyn's arrival eased slightly, letting them all breathe a little deeper. Margaret still didn't trust easily, but she'd stopped actively trying to make Evelyn's life difficult. Catherine had begun seeking Evelyn out for small conversations that had nothing to do with grief or loss. And Lily remained Lily, uncomplicated and joyful, and completely convinced that Evelyn hung the moon. Evelyn fell into bed exhausted but less empty than she'd been that morning. Progress, she thought. Slow and painful, but still progress. 2 days later, she woke in the dead hours before dawn to the sound of someone crying. Not Margaret this time, and not Catherine's careful, muffled sobs. This was closer, more desperate, the kind of crying that came with physical distress. Evelyn threw on her wrapper and followed the sound to Lily's room. The little girl was sitting up in bed, her face flushed and her breathing rapid and shallow. Even from the doorway, Evelyn could hear the wheeze in her chest. "Lily? Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Lily turned those huge eyes on her, and Evelyn's heart clenched at the fear in them. "Can't breathe right," she gasped. "Hurts." Evelyn was at her side in an instant, one hand on the child's forehead, burning hot. She pressed her ear to Lily's chest and heard the congestion rattling there, deep and wet and dangerous. "Catherine," Evelyn's voice cracked with urgency. "Margaret! Rowan!" They came running, all three appearing in the doorway within seconds, sleep-rumpled and alarmed. Rowan took one look at Lily and went pale. "How long has she been like this?" "I just found her." Evelyn kept her hand on Lily's back, supporting her upright to ease the breathing. "Chest fever, bad one." "I'll ride for the doctor," Rowan said, already turning. "No." Evelyn's voice was sharp. "It's a 3-hour ride each way. By the time you get back, she could be—" She stopped, not wanting to voice the possibility in front of the other girls. "We need to treat her now. Steam, poultices, keep the fever down and the fluid moving. Do you have mustard powder, eucalyptus, clean linen?" "I think so. Sarah kept medical supplies in the kitchen." "Show me." "Margaret, I need you to boil water, lots of it. Catherine, get me extra blankets and towels. We're going to turn this room into a steam tent." Evelyn lifted Lily carefully. "And someone find me a nightdress that's easier to get on and off. We'll need to change her frequently as she sweats." They scattered to their tasks with the efficiency of people used to crisis. Evelyn carried Lily downstairs to the kitchen where it would be easier to generate and maintain steam. The little girl whimpered against her shoulder, each breath a struggle. "I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts. But we're going to make it better, all right? You just have to be brave a little longer." Rowan reappeared with an old medical chest, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. Inside were neat rows of bottles and tins, everything Sarah had collected for frontier medical care. Evelyn scanned the contents with practiced eyes, relief flooding through her when she found what she needed. "Good. This is good. We can work with this." She pulled out mustard powder, eucalyptus oil, willow bark for the fever. "I need a large pot of boiling water and a smaller basin we can put on the table. And bring down that rocking chair from the bedroom. I'll need somewhere to hold her while she breathes the steam." The next hours blurred into organized chaos. Evelyn set up a makeshift steam tent using blankets draped over the rocking chair, positioning Lily in her lap so the child could breathe the eucalyptus-infused vapor. Margaret kept water boiling in steady rotation. Catherine prepared cold compresses for Lily's forehead and prepared the mustard poultice Evelyn would apply to the child's chest. Lily drifted between fevered wakefulness and exhausted sleep, her small body shaking with the effort of breathing. Each cough seemed to tear through her, and more than once Evelyn felt the child's breath stop completely before starting again with a desperate gasp. "She's getting worse," Rowan said, his voice tight with fear as he watched from the doorway. You should stay here and trust me," Evelyn said firmly. "I've done this before. My father's lungs were weak for years before the final illness. I know how to fight this." If she dies, she won't. Not if everyone stays calm and follows instructions. Evelyn adjusted Lily's position, wiping sweat from the child's face. Margaret, I need fresh steam. Catherine, prepare another poultice. The last one's gone cold. And Rowan, she met his eyes steadily. I need you to breathe. Your daughters are watching you, and if you panic, they'll panic. Can you be strong right now? Rowan took a shuddering breath and nodded. What can I do? Hold Catherine. She's terrified and trying to hide it, and she needs her father to tell her it's going to be all right. Evelyn watched as Rowan moved to Catherine's side, wrapping an arm around the girl's thin shoulders. Catherine leaned into him with visible relief, and Margaret glanced over at them with something like longing before turning back to the stove. The night wore on. Evelyn worked with quiet, methodical precision. Steam treatments every 20 minutes, cold compresses when the fever spiked, mustard poultices to break up the congestion. She sang softly to Lily during the worst moments, songs her mother had sung to her, and felt the little girl relax slightly at the sound. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Margaret appeared at her elbow with a cup of tea. You need to drink something, the girl said quietly. You're going to make yourself sick. I'm fine. You're not. Papa says you haven't eaten since yesterday morning, and you've been holding her for 4 hours straight. Margaret set the cup firmly on the small table beside the chair. I'll take over for a few minutes. You drink that and eat something. Evelyn wanted to refuse, but her arms were shaking with fatigue, and her back screamed from holding the same position for so long. She transferred Lily carefully to Margaret's arms, showing her how to position the child for optimal breathing. Like this? Perfect. Keep the blanket tent closed as much as possible. We want her breathing that eucalyptus with every breath. Evelyn stood, wincing as her joints protested. If she starts coughing hard, sit her up straighter. And if she stops breathing, even for a second, you call me immediately. I know, I helped with Mama when the lung fever took her. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt something in her chest clench, recognition of the terrible symmetry, the fear that history might repeat itself in the worst possible way. She's not your mother, Evelyn said gently. This isn't the same situation. How do you know? Because I won't let it be. Because we caught it earlier, and we have the supplies we need, and because I have 2 years of experience fighting exactly this kind of infection. Evelyn touched Margaret's shoulder lightly. Your mother died from hemorrhage complications. This is different. Margaret's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Okay, go eat. I've got her. Evelyn forced down bread and cheese she couldn't taste while Catherine prepared another poultice. Rowan stood at the window, staring out at the darkness like he could will the sun to rise faster through sheer determination. She's going to make it, Evelyn said, coming to stand beside him. Her lungs are clearing, slowly, but clearing. The fever's still high, but not climbing anymore. Those are good signs. You can't know that for certain. No, but I can make an educated assessment based on what I'm seeing. Evelyn kept her voice low. I know you're scared. I know this is bringing up everything you felt when Sarah died. But Lily isn't Sarah, and chest fever isn't hemorrhage. This is winnable if we don't give up. Rowan turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and fear. How are you so calm? I'm not calm. I'm terrified. But terror doesn't help her, so I'm choosing to be functional instead. Evelyn managed a weak smile. Ask me again when this is over, and I'll show you how not calm I really am. They returned to the vigil. The hours crept past with agonizing slowness. Lily's breathing remained labored but steady. The fever fluctuated but didn't spike higher. The congestion in her chest loosened fractionally with each steam treatment. Dawn broke gray and cool, and with it came a subtle shift. Lily's breathing eased slightly. The flush in her cheeks faded from angry red to merely pink. When Evelyn checked her temperature, it had dropped a full degree. It's breaking, she said, hardly daring to believe it. The fever's breaking. Catherine made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Margaret's shoulders slumped with relief. Rowan closed his eyes and seemed to sway on his feet. But Evelyn didn't let herself relax. Not yet. The next hours would be critical. The fever could spike again. The congestion could worsen. A dozen things could still go wrong. She maintained the steam treatments, the poultices, the constant attention. By mid-morning, Lily opened her eyes with something approaching clarity. "Thirsty," she whispered. Evelyn nearly wept with relief. "Of course you are, sweetheart. Let's get you some water." She held the cup to Lily's cracked lips, letting her sip slowly. The little girl managed 3 swallows before falling back into sleep. Real sleep this time, not the fevered unconsciousness of before. "She's going to be all right," Evelyn said softly. "We did it." Margaret, who'd been holding her composure through the entire night, suddenly crumpled. She sank to the floor and put her head in her hands, her whole body shaking. Catherine knelt beside her, wrapping thin arms around her older sister, and they clung to each other the way Evelyn imagined they hadn't since their mother died. Rowan crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled both girls into a fierce embrace. "You were so brave," he said, his voice breaking. "Both of you. So brave." Evelyn stood apart from the family tableau, still holding Lily, and felt the full weight of the night settle onto her shoulders. Her arms shook, her legs trembled. The adrenaline that had kept her functional was draining away, leaving nothing but exhaustion and delayed terror. She must have made some sound because suddenly Rowan was there, taking Lily gently from her arms and settling the sleeping child into the nest of blankets they'd prepared. "Your turn to rest," he said firmly. "I need to monitor her, make sure—" "I'll monitor her. You've been awake for over 24 hours and you just spent an entire night fighting for my daughter's life." Rowan guided her toward the stairs with gentle insistence. "You've earned the right to collapse. Please take it." Evelyn wanted to argue, but her body had already made the decision for her. She barely made it to her room before her legs gave out completely. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking, and finally let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The fear, the exhaustion, the terrible, desperate determination that had kept her moving. The grief for her father layered beneath the crisis with Lily. All of it crashed over her in waves until she was shaking too hard to even cry. A soft knock on the door. Catherine appeared, carrying a tray with tea and toast. She set it carefully on the nightstand, then did something Evelyn didn't expect. She climbed onto the bed and curled against Evelyn's side, small and warm and solid. "Thank you for saving her," Catherine whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." Evelyn wrapped an arm around the girl and held on like a lifeline. "I couldn't. She's too important." "So are you," Catherine said simply. "You're important too." They sat that way until Evelyn's shaking eased and exhaustion pulled her under. The last thing she remembered was Catherine pulling a blanket over them both, and the feeling of being less alone than she'd felt in months. Evelyn woke to afternoon light slanting through the window and the sound of voices drifting up from below. Rowan's deep rumble, Margaret's sharp responses, and underneath it all, Lily's high, clear laugh. The sound sent relief flooding through her chest so profound it was almost painful. She rose slowly, her body protesting every movement. Her back ached from hours of holding the same position. Her arms felt like lead, and exhaustion still clung to her bones like wet wool. But Lily was laughing, which meant Lily was breathing, which meant they'd won. Catherine was gone from the bed, though the imprint of her small body remained in the quilts. Evelyn washed quickly at the basin and changed into a fresh dress, then made her way downstairs on legs that felt unsteady. The kitchen had been transformed back to normalcy. The steam tent dismantled, the blankets folded, the medical supplies packed away. Lily sat at the table wrapped in a blanket, pale but alert, eating small spoonfuls of broth, while Rowan watched her with the vigilance of someone who'd nearly lost everything. Margaret was at the stove, and Catherine sat beside Lily, one hand resting protectively on her little sister's arm. They all looked up when Evelyn appeared in the doorway. Lily's face lit up immediately. "Evie!" The nickname came out as barely more than a croak, Lily's voice still rough from coughing, but it was the sweetest sound Evelyn had ever heard. "You made me better." "You made yourself better by being very brave," Evelyn corrected, moving to the table and pressing her hand to Lily's forehead. Still warm, but nothing like the raging fever of the night before. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Tired, and my chest hurts, but Papa says I can have honey in my tea if I finish my broth." "Then you'd better finish it." Evelyn smoothed the child's tangled hair back from her face. "You gave us quite a scare." "I didn't mean to." Lily's eyes welled up. "Sorry." "No apologies necessary. Sometimes we get sick, and it's nobody's fault. Evelyn glanced at Rowan, reading the exhaustion and residual fear in every line of his body. Has she been awake long? About an hour. Fever broke completely around noon. Rowan's voice was rough with fatigue. Dr. Morrison rode up to check on her. Margaret sent word at dawn. He said you did everything exactly right, and if we'd waited for him to arrive, we probably would have lost her. The words settled into the room with uncomfortable weight. Margaret turned from the stove, her eyes meeting Evelyn's with something that might have been gratitude mixed with residual terror. He left medicine for the cough and instructions for the next few days, Margaret said quietly. Said to keep doing what you were doing. Steam treatments twice daily until the congestion clears completely. Light meals, lots of rest. Good. That's good. Evelyn accepted the cup of tea Catherine pressed into her hands and sank into a chair. Now that the crisis had passed, delayed reaction was setting in. Her hands trembled slightly, and she couldn't quite shake the memory of Lily's desperate breathing, the terrible fear that she might fail to save this child the way she couldn't save her own father. Are you all right? Catherine asked softly. Just tired. You can rest now, the girl said. We'll watch her. But Evelyn found she couldn't rest. Over the next days, she hovered near Lily with the same relentless vigilance she'd once directed toward her father, checking temperatures, monitoring breathing, administering treatments with careful precision. The little girl tolerated it all with remarkable patience, seeming to understand that Evelyn needed the constant attention as much as Lily needed the care. Rowan watched this with growing concern. On the third day after the fever broke, he found Evelyn in the kitchen at 2 a.m, preparing yet another steam treatment even though Lily had been breathing easy for hours. She's fine, he said gently from the doorway. Evelyn startled, nearly dropping the kettle. I know, I just wanted to make sure. You've checked on her 6 times since midnight. She's sleeping peacefully. Rowan moved into the kitchen, taking the kettle from her hands and setting it aside. When's the last time you slept more than an hour at a stretch? I sleep enough. That's not what I asked. He guided her to a chair with gentle insistence. Sit, please. Evelyn sat, and the moment she stopped moving, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She put her head in her hands, feeling the tremor that had become constant over the past days. I can't lose her, she whispered. I can't lose another person. I can't. You won't. She's recovering beautifully, and that's because of you. Rowan crouched in front of her chair, bringing himself level with her downturned face. But you're going to make yourself sick if you don't rest, and then who's going to take care of everyone? You are. You were doing fine before I arrived. We were surviving. That's not the same as fine. Rowan's voice was quiet but firm. Evelyn, look at me. She raised her head slowly, meeting his gray eyes. In the lamplight, she could see the exhaustion there too, the worry that had carved new lines around his mouth. You saved my daughter's life, he said simply. You stepped into a crisis with a child you'd known for less than a month and fought like she was your own. That kind of dedication, that kind of courage. His voice roughened. I don't have words adequate to thank you for it, but I need you to understand that you're valuable too. Your health matters, your rest matters, and running yourself into the ground won't prevent the next crisis from happening. How do you know there will be a next crisis? Because we're living in Montana in 1874, and there's always a next crisis. Rowan's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. But we face them better when we're rested and functioning, not half dead from exhaustion and running on fear. Evelyn knew he was right. The rational part of her brain understood that her vigilance had crossed from necessary to obsessive days ago. But the irrational part, the part that had watched her father die slowly, that had felt Lily's labored breathing and known how easily it could stop, refused to let go. I don't know how to stop, she admitted. Then let me help you. Rowan stood, offering his hand. Come on, I'm walking you to your room, and you're going to sleep for at least 6 hours. I'll check on Lily myself, and if anything changes even slightly, I'll wake you immediately. Deal? What if... No, what ifs. Just trust me. Can you do that? Evelyn looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then placed hers in it. His grip was warm and solid, calloused from years of ranch work, but surprisingly gentle. He pulled her to her feet and kept hold of her hand as he led her up the stairs, as if afraid she might bolt back to the kitchen the moment he let go. At her bedroom door, he paused. "Sleep, Evelyn. That's an order from your husband, which I realize carries questionable authority given the nature of our arrangement, but I'm invoking it anyway." Despite everything, Evelyn felt a small smile tug at her mouth. "You're very bossy when you want to be." Sarah used to say the same thing, usually right before she ignored me completely. His expression softened. "But you're not Sarah. You actually listen to reason occasionally. So please, for the love of everything, sleep." She did sleep and woke 8 hours later to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of the household functioning perfectly well without her. The realization should have been alarming. Instead, it felt like relief. Downstairs, she found breakfast already prepared and the girls helping clean up. Lily sat at the table drawing on a slate, still wrapped in blankets but with color returning to her cheeks. She looked up when Evelyn appeared and beamed. "You slept forever. Papa said we had to be extra quiet so you wouldn't wake up." "Did he?" Evelyn glanced at Rowan, who had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "You needed it," he said simply. The next week settled into a new rhythm. Lily recovered fully, her breathing clear and her energy returning in typical 2-year-old fashion, which is to say overwhelming and constant. The crisis had shifted something fundamental in the household's dynamics. Margaret no longer watched Evelyn with suspicion, but with something closer to respect, occasionally seeking her advice on household matters. Catherine had become openly affectionate, slipping her hand into Evelyn's while they worked, or leaning against her shoulder while they sat on the porch in the evenings. And Rowan had started looking at her differently. Evelyn couldn't quite name the change, but she felt it in the way his gaze would linger when he thought she wasn't paying attention, in the careful way he made sure she had the warmest seat by the fire, in the small considerations that had nothing to do with contract obligations and everything to do with genuine care. It should have alarmed her. Instead, it felt like the ground slowly solidifying beneath her feet. 3 weeks after Lily's recovery, Evelyn woke to a morning that felt different. The air carried an edge of autumn, cooler, crisper, with a hint of the winter to come. She dressed and went downstairs to find Margaret already in the kitchen, but instead of starting breakfast, the girl stood at the window staring out at the valley. "What's wrong?" Evelyn asked. Margaret turned, and her face was pale. "There's a rider coming, from town." Evelyn moved to the window. Sure enough, a lone horseman was making his way up the valley trail, moving with the kind of urgency that suggested this wasn't a social call. As he drew closer, Evelyn could see he wore a suit despite the dust of hard riding. A businessman or lawyer, out of place in this frontier landscape. Rowan appeared from the barn, having spotted the rider as well. By the time the man reached the house, the whole family had gathered on the porch, watching with various degrees of curiosity and concern. The rider dismounted stiffly, pulling an envelope from his saddlebag. He was younger than Evelyn had initially thought, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and a nervous energy that spoke of someone who didn't often venture this far from civilization. "Mr. Caleb Rowan?" he asked. "That's me. I have correspondence from a Mr. James Rowan of Denver. He hired me to deliver this personally and wait for your response." The man handed over the envelope with visible relief at having completed his journey. Rowan's face went carefully blank. He took the envelope without opening it, his jaw tightening in a way Evelyn had learned meant he was working to control strong emotion. "Margaret, would you show this gentleman to the kitchen and get him something to eat? I'm sure he's had a long ride." Rowan's voice was level, but Evelyn heard the tension underneath. "I'll read this and have a response shortly." The courier followed Margaret inside gratefully, and the moment he was out of sight, Rowan's composure cracked. He stared at the envelope like it might contain a live snake. "Who's James Rowan?" Evelyn asked quietly. "My brother?" Rowan's voice was flat. "We haven't spoken in 5 years." He walked away from the house, heading toward the ridge where they'd buried Thomas Carter. Evelyn watched him go, then glanced at Catherine, who'd gone pale. "What does it mean?" the girl whispered. "Uncle James never writes unless something's wrong." "I don't know, sweetheart, but your father will handle it." Evelyn touched Catherine's shoulder. "Why don't you go help Margaret with the courier? I'll go check on your father." She found Rowan standing at her father's grave, the envelope open in his hands and several pages of closely written text fluttering in the breeze. His face was carved from stone. Caleb? He didn't turn. My brother is contesting the ranch, claims I mismanaged Sarah's dowry, which was substantial, and that I'm an unfit guardian for the girls. He's bringing a lawyer and several investors up from Denver next week to make his case for taking control of the property and gaining custody of my daughters. Evelyn felt ice slide down her spine. Can he do that? Legally? Maybe. Sarah's family money helped build this place, and I never formalized the property division after she died. I was too busy trying to keep everyone alive to worry about legal niceties. Rowan's hands clenched on the letter. And James has always believed I wasn't good enough for Sarah, that I somehow trapped her into a life she didn't want. He tried to stop our marriage. When that failed, he tried to convince her to leave me. After she died, he blamed me for it. Did you know he was planning this? No. We haven't had contact since Sarah's funeral. I assumed he'd washed his hands of us. Rowan finally turned to face her, and Evelyn was startled by the fear in his eyes. If he gets the courts on his side, he could take everything. The ranch, the girls, all of it. And I have no legal recourse because technically he's right. I never properly documented Sarah's estate distribution. There has to be something we can do. Against a man with money, connections, and a team of lawyers, in a territory where judges can be bought for the price of a good horse? Rowan's laugh was bitter. The only thing in my favor is that I'm currently married, which makes me look more stable than I did as a widower. But even that's questionable given how recently we wed and under what circumstances. The words hung between them, and Evelyn felt the full weight of their arrangement settle onto her shoulders. A marriage of convenience entered into for mutual survival. Would it hold up under legal scrutiny from someone determined to find fault? When does he arrive? She asked. 7 days from the date of this letter, which means Rowan checked the date on the envelope. 4 days. We have 4 days to prepare a defense against someone who's spent months planning this attack. They stood together on the ridge, looking down at the valley, at the ranch Rowan had built with his own hands, at the life he'd carved out of wilderness and grief. The thought of losing it, of having his daughters taken from him, was written clearly in every line of his body. We'll fight him, Evelyn said quietly. Whatever it takes, we'll fight him. You don't have to. This isn't your battle. I married you. I committed to this family. That makes it my battle whether I chose it or not. She met his eyes steadily. Besides, I've already lost everything once. I'm not interested in watching you lose everything too. Not when there's something I can do to help prevent it. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm practical. There's a difference. Sarah would have said the same thing. He smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. All right. If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. James will look for any weakness, any crack in our story. The marriage, the household management, the girls' well-being, all of it has to be beyond reproach. They spent the rest of that day in careful preparation. Rowan went through every document related to the ranch, organizing deeds and receipts and financial records. Evelyn took stock of the household, what was well-maintained, what needed improvement, where vulnerabilities might lie. Margaret and Catherine were brought into the discussion, old enough to understand what was at stake. He can't take us away, Catherine said, her voice small and terrified. He can't. He's going to try, Rowan said honestly. Your uncle believes I've failed you all, and he thinks he can provide a better life. We have to prove him wrong. But we're not. Margaret stopped, her face crumpling. We're not fine. We've been falling apart for 2 years. Anyone who looks will see that. Anyone who looked a month ago would have seen that, Evelyn corrected gently. But things have changed. You're healing, all of you. It's slow and it's hard, but it's happening. We just need to make sure your uncle sees that progress instead of the pain you've been carrying. Over the next 4 days, the household transformed. Not superficially, Evelyn refused to create a false picture of perfection that would crumble under scrutiny, but genuinely. They established clear routines, organized the household accounts with meticulous precision, and most importantly, they practiced being a family instead of just people occupying the same space. Meals became deliberate gathering times where they talked and laughed and functioned as a unit. Evelyn made sure the girls' clothes were mended and well-fitting. that their hair was neatly arranged, that they carried themselves with the confidence of children who knew they were valued. Rowan prepared his case with the help of the local notary, documenting every improvement to the ranch, every financial decision, every indication of stable guardianship. And through it all, Evelyn felt the marriage that had started as pure transaction begin to shift into something more complex. She and Rowan worked together with increasing synchronicity, anticipating each other's thoughts, supporting each other's decisions. At night, they sat together reviewing strategy, and Evelyn found herself noticing things she'd been too busy to see before. The strength in his hands, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words actually mattered. It was disorienting and uncomfortable and oddly thrilling all at once. On the third evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Rowan poured them both whiskey and sat heavily in the chair across from Evelyn. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer honestly, not out of obligation." "All right. If James succeeds, if he takes the ranch and the girls, what will you do?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. A month ago, the answer would have been simple. Leave, start over somewhere else, survive alone the way she'd always known how. Now the thought of walking away from this family felt like amputation. "I'll fight for them," she said finally. "The girls, I mean. If there's any legal avenue to maintain my relationship with them, I'll pursue it. And if there's not..." She took a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn down her throat. "I'll make sure they know I didn't abandon them willingly, that they mattered enough to fight for, even if we lost." "And me? What about me?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean? Do I matter enough to fight for?" Rowan's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Or am I just the means to an end? Access to the girls, a roof over your head, safety from Hartley." Evelyn set down her glass and looked at him directly. "When I agreed to marry you, yes, it was transactional. I needed security. You needed help. We were both using each other in the most honest way possible." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But somewhere in the past month, you stopped being a transaction and started being more. I don't know what to call it yet. Partnership, maybe? Friendship? Something that feels like it could grow into more if we gave it time and space and honesty." Rowan absorbed this, his expression unreadable. "Sarah and I married for love. We were young and stupid and completely convinced that feeling was enough to sustain a life together. It was mostly, but it was also harder than anyone warns you about. Loving someone that much means you can hurt them that deeply, and we did, regularly." He ran a hand through his hair. "This thing with you, it's different, calmer, less dramatic. But it feels," he struggled for the word, "sustainable. Like we could build something that lasts because it's based on mutual respect instead of overwhelming emotion. Is that what you want? Something sustainable?" "I think so. I'm tired of drama and grief and constant crisis. I want stability, partnership, someone who sees me clearly and chooses to stay anyway." He met her eyes. "Is that something you could want too?" Evelyn felt her heart beating faster. "Yes, I think it is." "Good." Rowan smiled slightly. "Then let's make sure James doesn't take it away before we have a chance to figure out what it becomes." The night before James Rowan's arrival, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She rose before dawn and found Rowan already in the barn, working off nervous energy by mucking stalls that didn't need mucking. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Keep running through everything in my head, trying to anticipate his arguments." Rowan drove the pitchfork into the hay with more force than necessary. "James is smart, ruthless when he wants something, and he's wanted this ranch since Sarah first brought me home to meet her family." "Then we'll be smarter, more ruthless." Evelyn leaned against the stall door. "Tell me about him. Everything. I need to know who we're fighting." Rowan set aside the pitchfork and sat on a hay bale, and in the strengthening dawn light, he told her. James Rowan was 3 years older, educated back east, brilliant at business, and terrible at human connection. He'd built a mining fortune in Colorado, married well, and cultivated influence the way other men cultivated crops. He'd opposed Caleb's marriage to Sarah because she was from old money, and Caleb was a dirt-poor rancher's son with nothing but ambition and calloused hands. He told her I'd drag her down, Rowan said quietly, that I'd waste her inheritance on failed ventures and leave her stranded in the wilderness with babies she didn't want. Sarah married me anyway, partly because she loved me, and partly, I think, because it was the one thing James couldn't control. Did she regret it? Some days, maybe. Ranch life is hard, and she gave up a lot of comfort and society to be here, but she never said so. And when she died, his voice roughened. James showed up at the funeral and told me it was my fault, that if I'd let her stay in Denver where there were real doctors, she might have survived. Maybe he was right. He wasn't, Evelyn said firmly. Hemorrhage complications happen in the best hospitals with the most skilled doctors. Geography wouldn't have saved her. Try telling James that. They worked together in silence, completing the morning chores as the sun rose over the eastern peaks. By the time they returned to the house, the girls were awake, and nervous energy filled every corner. The riders appeared just before noon, 5 of them, moving up the valley trail with the purposeful pace of people on a mission. James Rowan led them, and even from a distance, Evelyn could see the resemblance to Caleb. Same height, same broad shoulders, but where Caleb's bearing spoke of physical labor and direct honesty, James carried himself with the polished confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. The family assembled on the porch as the riders approached. Evelyn stood beside Rowan, the girls arrayed around them in a formation that was half defensive, half defiant. Margaret's face was set in hard lines. Catherine pressed close to Evelyn's side, and Lily, bless her, seemed to think this was all tremendously exciting. James dismounted smoothly, handing his reins to one of the men accompanying him. Lawyers, Evelyn assumed, from their city clothes and assessing gazes. He removed his hat and approached the porch with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Caleb, it's been too long." "Not long enough, apparently." Rowan's voice was level but cold. "What are you doing here, James?" "I believe my letter explained that. I've come to discuss the future of this ranch and the welfare of my nieces." James's gaze swept the assembled family, pausing on Evelyn with obvious curiosity. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your wife?" "Evelyn, this is my brother James." "James, my wife." "Evelyn, Rowan." Evelyn stepped forward, extending her hand with the calm assurance her mother had taught her years ago. "Mr. Rowan, welcome to our home." James took her hand, his grip firm and assessing. His eyes were the same gray as Caleb's, but colder, calculating. "Mrs. Rowan, I must say, I was surprised to hear of my brother's sudden marriage. Quite sudden, in fact. Barely 2 months after your father's death, according to the county records. Grief doesn't follow a timeline, Mr. Rowan. Neither does practical necessity." Evelyn met his gaze steadily, refusing to be cowed. "But surely you didn't ride all this way to critique the timing of our marriage. Perhaps we should discuss your actual concerns in a more civilized setting." A flicker of surprise crossed James's face. He'd expected defensive stammering, not cool composure. "Of course, forgive my directness. It's a hazard of too many years in business." They moved inside, and Evelyn was grateful for the days of preparation. The house was immaculate without being sterile, lived in without being chaotic. Margaret served coffee with the practiced grace of someone who'd been managing a household for years, and Catherine sat quietly beside her father, her posture perfect. James's lawyers, 2 sharp-eyed men named Preston and Walsh, took in everything with obvious assessment. They noted the account ledgers Rowan had laid out, the evidence of careful household management, the well-maintained furnishings, and the children's obvious health and education. "Shall we begin?" James said, settling into a chair like he owned it. "I'll be direct, Caleb. I don't believe you're capable of managing this property or raising 3 girls alone. Sarah's inheritance helped build this ranch, and I have a responsibility to ensure it's not squandered through mismanagement or neglect." "I'm not alone," Rowan said quietly. "I'm married, and the ranch is thriving. The account books will show consistent profit, livestock expansion, and capital improvements. A marriage of convenience entered into mere weeks ago doesn't constitute stability." James turned to Evelyn. "No offense, Mrs. Rowan, but marrying a widower with 3 children and a disputed property claim suggests desperation rather than devotion." "You're right," Evelyn said calmly. "I was desperate. My father was dying, and I needed security. Your brother needed help managing his household and healing his family. We made an arrangement that benefited us both. Is that somehow less valid than a romantic marriage? Less likely to endure?" James blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. That's not. Let me save you some time, Mr. Rowan. You're looking for evidence of instability, of poor judgment, of an unfit household. You won't find it. Not because we've created an illusion for your benefit, but because in the past month, this family has fought through genuine crisis and come out stronger. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. 3 weeks ago, Lily nearly died of chest fever. I spent an entire night fighting to keep her breathing while your brother and his daughters worked alongside me. We saved her life together, as a family. That's not performance, that's reality. One of the lawyers, Preston, spoke up. "With all due respect, Mrs. Rowan, one medical crisis successfully managed doesn't constitute adequate long-term guardianship." "You're absolutely right," Evelyn agreed, "which is why you'll also want to examine the educational progress both older girls have made, the household accounts that show careful financial management, the ranch improvements that have increased property value by an estimated 20%, and the simple fact that these children are healthy, safe, and genuinely healing from their mother's death. What exactly is your standard for adequate guardianship, Mr. Preston? Because by any reasonable measure, it's being met here." The room fell silent. James's face had gone carefully blank, but Evelyn could see the calculation behind his eyes. He'd expected an easy target, a desperate woman and a grief-broken man. Instead, he was facing unified opposition backed by documented evidence. "Perhaps," Walsh said carefully, "we should examine the household operations more closely. With your permission, Mr. Rowan?" What followed was an exhausting afternoon of inspection and interrogation. The lawyers examined every aspect of the ranch operations, while James questioned the girls with barely concealed skepticism. But Margaret faced him with calm dignity, answering his questions about household management with the competence of someone twice her age. Catherine, when asked about her education and daily routine, responded with quiet confidence. And Lily, bless her completely, climbed into James's lap uninvited and asked him if he'd ever seen a really interesting rock. James looked completely bewildered, which Evelyn took as a small victory. By evening, the lawyers had retreated to their notebooks, conferring in low voices. James sat across from Caleb in the parlor, his expression unreadable. "I'll admit," he said finally, "this isn't what I expected to find." "What did you expect? Squalor? Neglected children? Proof I'd wasted Sarah's money on drink and poor investments?" Caleb's voice was tight with controlled anger. "You've been waiting for me to fail since the day Sarah chose me over your approval. When she died, you saw your opening. But I haven't failed, James. I've survived. We've all survived. And we're building something real here, something that honors Sarah's memory better than any legal guardianship transfer ever could." "Sarah's memory?" James's voice went cold. "You dare speak of honoring her memory when you replaced her within 2 years?" "I didn't replace her. I found someone willing to help us remember how to be a family without her." Caleb stood, and Evelyn saw his hands shake slightly with suppressed emotion. "Sarah told me, in the hours before she died, to make sure the girls remembered how to laugh. For 2 years, I failed at that. Then Evelyn arrived, and slowly, painfully, we've started to remember. If you take them away now, you won't be protecting them. You'll be destroying the only stability they've managed to build since their mother died." The words hung in the air. James looked at his brother for a long moment, then at the girls. Margaret watching with fierce protective intensity, Catherine pale but resolute, Lily dozing against Evelyn's shoulder. "I need to think," James said finally. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow." He and his lawyers retreated to the guest quarters, and the family was left in tense silence. That night, none of them slept well. Evelyn lay in bed listening to the house creak and settle, wondering if tomorrow would bring victory or devastation, and whether her presence had helped or simply complicated an already impossible situation. Morning came too quickly, and brought with it a tension that made the air feel thick enough to choke on. Evelyn rose before dawn and found Margaret already in the kitchen, her hands moving through the familiar motions of starting breakfast with mechanical precision. "Couldn't sleep either?" Evelyn asked quietly. Margaret shook her head, not turning from the stove. "What if he takes us away? What if all of this, everything we've built, what if it doesn't matter? It matters. Evelyn moved to stand beside her, taking over the coffee preparation. Regardless of what your uncle decides, the healing you've done matters. The family you've become matters. No court decision can take that away. But he can take Catherine and Lily. He can take the ranch. He can make Papa... Margaret's voice broke. He can destroy everything we have left. Then we make sure he understands exactly what he'd be destroying. Evelyn touched the girl's shoulder gently. Your uncle came here expecting to find failure. Instead, he found strength. That has to count for something. They worked together in silence until Rowan appeared, looking like he'd slept even less than they had. His eyes were shadowed, his jaw tight with the kind of tension that came from a night spent preparing for battle. Catherine emerged next, pale and quiet, followed eventually by Lily, who remained blissfully unaware of the stakes and chattered happily about the funny men staying in their house. Her innocence was both heartbreaking and strangely fortifying, a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. James and his lawyers appeared precisely at 8, dressed for business despite the frontier setting. They settled in the parlor with their notebooks and documents, and Evelyn had the distinct impression they'd spent the night planning their attack. I've reviewed the financial records, James began without preamble. They're adequate, I'll grant you that. The ranch is profitable and there's no evidence of mismanagement of Sarah's inheritance. Adequate, Rowan repeated, his voice flat. I've increased the property value by 20% and maintained consistent profit through 2 years of drought and personal crisis. And you call it adequate. I call it the bare minimum of responsible stewardship. James's voice was cool. But financial solvency isn't the only consideration. There's also the question of the children's welfare and education. Walsh opened his notebook. We'd like to speak with each of the girls individually, if you don't mind, to assess their well-being without parental influence. Evelyn saw Rowan tense, but before he could object, Margaret stood. I'll go first. She walked into the study with Walsh and Preston while the rest of them waited in excruciating silence. 20 minutes passed, then 30. When Margaret finally emerged, her face was carefully composed, but Evelyn saw the tremor in her hands. What did they ask you? Rowan said quietly. Everything. About Mama's death, about before Evelyn came, about whether I felt safe, whether I was happy, whether I wanted to leave. Margaret's jaw tightened. I told them the truth, all of it. Catherine went next, and Evelyn's heart ached at how small the girl looked walking into that room alone. But when she emerged 15 minutes later, she held her head high and her eyes were dry. Your turn, little bird, Rowan said gently to Lily. Do I have to talk to the boring men? Just for a few minutes, then you can come back to us. Lily went reluctantly, and the wait felt interminable. When she finally bounded out, completely unfazed, Evelyn felt some of the tension in her chest ease. The lawyers conferred in low voices while James watched his brother with an expression that was difficult to read. Finally, Preston spoke. The children appear healthy and well cared for. Margaret demonstrates remarkable competence for her age, though we have concerns about whether she's been forced to assume too much responsibility. Catherine is clearly intelligent and well-educated, but also exhibits signs of anxiety and emotional suppression. And Lily is exuberant. They're children who lost their mother, Evelyn said quietly. Of course they carry damage. The question isn't whether they're perfect. It's whether they're healing and whether removing them from the only home they've known would help or harm that process. Mrs. Rowan makes a fair point, Walsh admitted reluctantly. However, Mr. James Rowan's concern extends beyond immediate welfare to long-term stability. A marriage of convenience entered into under duress may not provide the foundation these children need. Then perhaps you should ask the children what they need, Rowan said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Instead of deciding for them what's best. James stood abruptly. Caleb, might I speak with you privately? They walked out to the porch, leaving Evelyn and the girls with the lawyers. Through the window, Evelyn could see the brothers standing at the rail, their body language tense, but not actively hostile. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw the moment something shifted. Rowan's shoulders straightening, James's expression softening almost imperceptibly. What do you think they're talking about? Catherine whispered. Whether we're worth fighting over, Margaret said bluntly. Whether Uncle James really believes we'd be better off in Denver with him and Aunt Constance, or whether he's just trying to punish Papa for marrying Mama against his wishes. Evelyn started to object to the cynicism, then stopped. Because Margaret was probably right. This had never been purely about the children's welfare. It was about old resentments and unresolved grief, and two brothers who'd never learned how to talk to each other honestly. On the porch, the conversation seemed to be intensifying. Rowan's hands gripped the rail white-knuckled, and James had removed his hat, running his fingers through his hair in a gesture so similar to his brother's it was startling. Then James said something that made Rowan's head snap up. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Evelyn saw something pass between them, recognition, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. When they came back inside, both men looked shaken but slightly less combative. "The lawyers would like to speak with you now, Mrs. Rowan," James said, privately. Evelyn stood, smoothing her skirts with hands that wanted to tremble. "Of course." The study felt smaller with three men crowding it. Walsh and Preston sat behind the desk like judges, while Evelyn took the single chair opposite them. James stood by the window, his back to the room. "Mrs. Rowan," Preston began, "we need to understand the nature of your relationship with Mr. Rowan and his children. Specifically, we need to know whether this marriage is genuine or merely a legal convenience designed to prevent this inquiry." Evelyn had spent the night preparing for this question. She could lie, paint a picture of deep affection and romantic love that would satisfy their requirements, or she could tell the truth and trust that honesty would serve better than fiction. She chose truth. "When I married Caleb Rowan, it was absolutely a legal convenience. My father was dying, I had no resources, and Samuel Hartley was offering to erase our debt in exchange for a marriage I found repugnant. Caleb offered an alternative, partnership instead of ownership, respect instead of domination. I accepted because I had no better option." She met Preston's gaze steadily. "Is that the answer you were looking for? Evidence that our marriage is a sham?" "It's certainly not evidence of genuine affection," Walsh said dryly. "No, it's not. But genuine affection isn't what those girls needed. They needed stability, structure, someone willing to show up every day and do the hard work of helping them heal, without expecting gratitude or immediate love in return." Evelyn leaned forward. "In the 6 weeks I've been here, I've learned that Margaret carries her mother's death like a cross she can't put down. That Catherine has made herself so small trying to keep everyone else from breaking that she's forgotten how to ask for what she needs. That Lily is learning to talk without her mother to teach her the words for gentleness. And I've learned that their father is a good man who loves them desperately, but doesn't know how to be both mother and father at once." "And you believe you can be what they need?" Preston's voice was skeptical. "I believe I'm what they have, and I believe that showing up imperfectly is better than not showing up at all." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You want to know if this marriage is real? It's as real as any partnership built on mutual need and growing respect. It's not romance. It's not passion. It's two broken people trying to build something functional out of their individual wreckage, and three children learning that family doesn't require blood or perfection. Just commitment and honesty. And showing up when it's hard." The room fell silent. James finally turned from the window, and Evelyn was startled to see something like approval in his eyes. "What would you do?" Walsh asked carefully. "If we recommended the children be placed in Mr. James Rowan's custody?" The question hit like a physical blow. Evelyn took a breath, steadying herself. "I would fight it through every legal avenue available. And when those failed, I would make sure those girls knew I didn't abandon them willingly, that they mattered, that what we built here was real, even if the courts didn't recognize it." Her voice strengthened. "And then I would probably go to Denver and make your lives extremely difficult until you let me maintain some relationship with them, because I didn't survive my father's death and a crisis marriage and nearly losing Lily just to walk away quietly when bureaucracy decides it knows better." Preston's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "That's quite a threat, Mrs. Rowan." "It's not a threat. It's a promise." They dismissed her, and she returned to the parlor on shaking legs. Rowan stood immediately, reading her face with concern, but before he could speak, James raised his hand. "I think we've learned what we came here to learn," he said quietly. Gentlemen, might I have a moment alone with my brother and his wife? The lawyers retreated to the guest quarters, and suddenly it was just the three of them in the parlor, two brothers and the woman who'd inadvertently become the fulcrum of their conflict. James sank into a chair, and for the first time since arriving, he looked less like a businessman and more like a man carrying a heavy burden. I came here convinced I'd find disaster, he said finally, convinced that Caleb had failed Sarah's memory and was dragging her daughters down with him. I was prepared to take the girls, liquidate the ranch, and give them the life I thought Sarah would have wanted for them. And now? Rowan's voice was carefully controlled. Now I'm not sure what Sarah would have wanted. She loved this place, loved this life, even when it was hard. And she loved you, despite all my warnings that you'd break her heart. James looked at his brother with something that might have been regret. I blamed you when she died because it was easier than admitting I blamed myself for not stopping the marriage in the first place. If I'd tried harder, been more convincing, maybe she would have stayed in Denver where there were doctors who could have saved her. Or maybe she would have died anyway, Rowan said quietly. Geography doesn't prevent hemorrhage, James. Neither does money or city hospitals or any of the things you think might have made a difference. I know. Logically, I know. But grief isn't logical. James rubbed his face tiredly. I've spent 2 years building this case, convincing myself I was protecting my nieces from their father's incompetence. But watching them yesterday, seeing how they function together, listening to what they said in those interviews, he stopped, his voice roughening. Margaret told Walsh that she'd rather die than leave this ranch, that her father isn't perfect, but he's hers, and that you... He looked at Evelyn. She said, you're the first person since her mother died who doesn't expect her to be anyone other than exactly who she is. Evelyn felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She said that? Almost verbatim. Catherine said something similar, that you let her be scared without trying to fix it, and that's the safest she's felt in 2 years. James's jaw tightened. Even Lily, who barely understands what's happening, told Preston that Evie makes Papa smile, and that's important because he was sad for a long time. The words settled into the room like stones. Rowan had gone very still, his eyes fixed on his brother's face. So what are you saying? Rowan asked carefully. I'm saying I was wrong. The marriage might have started as convenience, but it's clearly become something more. Something that's helping my nieces heal in ways I didn't think possible after watching them at Sarah's funeral. James stood, moving to the window. I'm saying that removing them from this environment would do more harm than good, regardless of my personal feelings about how quickly you remarried. You're withdrawing the custody claim? Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper. I am. With conditions. James turned back to face them. I want regular correspondence, letters from the girls, updates on their education and welfare. And I want the property ownership formalized, Sarah's inheritance protected in trust for the children, with clear documentation that prevents any future disputes. Done. Absolutely done. Rowan crossed the room in 3 strides and extended his hand. Thank you, James, for being reasonable, for listening. James took his brother's hand, and for a moment they just stood there, 2 men who'd spent 5 years avoiding each other, finally finding common ground in the welfare of 3 children. Don't thank me yet, James said. I'm also leaving Walsh here for 2 weeks to help formalize all the legal documentation. You'll have to endure his presence while he draws up trust documents and property deeds and ensures everything is absolutely legally sound. I'll manage. James released his brother's hand and turned to Evelyn. Mrs. Rowan, I owe you an apology. I came here prepared to find you opportunistic at best, manipulative at worst. Instead, I find you're exactly what this family needed, even if the method of your arrival was unconventional. I'm not sure I'm what they needed, Evelyn said honestly. But I'm committed to being what they have and to doing my best with that responsibility. That's all anyone can ask, James smiled slightly. Sarah would have liked you, I think. She had a talent for seeing past social conventions to what actually mattered. And what matters here is that those girls are healing, and that's largely because you've been willing to show up imperfectly rather than maintain a polished distance. Over the next 2 weeks, Walsh worked with dogged efficiency to formalize every aspect of the ranch's ownership and the children's trusts. Evelyn found herself spending long hours reviewing documents, signing papers, and learning more about property law than she'd ever wanted to know. But something else was happening too. With the threat of losing everything lifted, the household began to truly exhale. Margaret laughed, actual genuine laughter, when Lily tried to help gather eggs and ended up covered in chicken feathers. Catherine started asking for things she wanted instead of quietly accepting whatever was offered. And Rowan seemed to stand straighter, the constant tension that had lived in his shoulders finally easing. One evening, about 10 days after James's departure, Evelyn stood on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. The autumn air had turned properly cold, and she could see her breath misting in the twilight. Behind her, she heard the door open and felt rather than saw Rowan join her. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Finally, Rowan spoke. "I've been thinking about something you said during the interviews, about our marriage being real because it's built on mutual need and growing respect." "I remember." "Do you still believe that's all it is?" "Mutual need?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. "No, I think it's become more than that. I'm just not sure what to call it yet." "What if we called it partnership? Real partnership, not just legal convenience." Rowan turned to face her, and in the fading light his eyes were soft. "What if we acknowledged that somewhere along the way, this stopped being an arrangement and started being a choice, choosing each other, choosing this life, choosing to build something genuine instead of just surviving together?" "That sounds like you're proposing," Evelyn said, her heart beating faster. "We're already married. I can't propose something that's already happened." Rowan smiled slightly. "But I can ask if you'd be willing to make it real, not just on paper, but in practice. Separate rooms if you want. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but a real marriage, a real partnership, a real commitment to building a life together instead of just coexisting under the same roof." Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the desperate father who'd arrived at her cabin months ago, but a man she'd come to respect deeply. A man who'd kept every promise, who'd supported her through grief, who'd fought beside her to protect his children. A man who made her laugh occasionally and frustrated her regularly and felt like the safest place she'd ever landed. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that." Rowan's face broke into a smile so genuine it transformed him. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Evelyn found herself smiling back. "We've already done everything backwards anyway. Might as well make the commitment real after we've already proven it works." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I want to do something, if you're willing. Something to mark this as different from the contract we signed at your father's bedside." "What did you have in mind?" "Come with me." He led her to the barn, where he'd clearly been working on something in secret. In the tack room, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, was a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal a ring, simple gold, clearly handmade, with a small stone set in the band that caught the lamplight. "It was my grandmother's," Rowan said quietly. "The only piece of family jewelry I have that didn't go to Sarah. I had the stone reset and the band resized." He took the ring from the box with slightly trembling hands. "It's not fancy, but it's honest, and it's yours if you want it." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "It's beautiful." "May I?" She held out her hand, and Rowan slid the ring onto her finger with careful reverence. It fit perfectly, the metal warm against her skin. "This isn't about ownership," he said softly. "It's about choice, about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Can you do that?" "I think so." Evelyn looked down at the ring, then up at him. "Can you?" "I can try. That's all I'm good at. Trying imperfectly and showing up anyway." "Then we're well matched." He kissed her then, gentle and careful and sweet. A first kiss that acknowledged all the complications and difficulties and still chose hope anyway. When they parted, both were smiling. "Should we tell the girls?" Evelyn asked. "They already know. Margaret's been watching us circle each other for weeks with the kind of knowing smugness only a 14-year-old can achieve." "Of course she has." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they entered the kitchen, 3 girls looked up from the table where they'd been pretending to do schoolwork. Margaret's eyebrows rose at their joined hands, Catherine broke into a delighted smile, and Lily shrieked with joy. Does this mean you're staying forever? Lily demanded, launching herself at Evelyn. It means I'm staying as long as forever lasts, Evelyn agreed, catching the little girl and swinging her up. Good, because I love you, and leaving would be terrible. The words were so simple, so uncomplicated, and they hit Evelyn square in the chest. She looked at this child she'd known for mere weeks, this family she'd joined out of desperation, and felt something in her chest crack wide open. I love you too, little bird. All of you. Margaret ducked her head, but not before Evelyn saw the pleased smile. Catherine came over and wrapped her arms around Evelyn's waist, pressing her face into her side. And Rowan stood watching his family with an expression of such profound relief and gratitude that Evelyn felt her own eyes sting with tears. This was what her father had wanted for her, not just survival, but genuine connection, not just a roof over her head, but a home, not just existence, but a life worth living. The winter came early that year, bringing snow that filled the valley and turned everything to crystal. Walsh finished his legal work and departed with handshakes and surprisingly warm wishes for their success. Letters arrived regularly from James, gradually warming from formal to genuinely affectionate as he received updates about his niece's progress. Margaret continued to heal, letting go of responsibility bit by bit and allowing herself to be young occasionally. Catherine grew bolder, asking for things and expressing opinions and taking up space without apology. And Lily remained gloriously, beautifully herself, finding joy in everything and reminding them all that laughter wasn't a betrayal of grief, but a celebration of survival. Evelyn and Rowan settled into their partnership with increasing ease. They moved slowly, carefully, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Separate rooms became shared space eventually, not out of obligation but genuine desire for proximity. Conversations deepened, trust solidified, and somewhere along the way, the marriage of convenience transformed into something neither of them had expected. Actual love, built on honesty and respect and choosing each other daily. One evening in late winter, Evelyn stood at her father's grave on the ridge, looking out over the snow-covered valley. She'd brought wildflowers preserved from autumn, her father's favorites, and placed them carefully at the headstone. I think you'd like it here, Papa, she said quietly. It's not what either of us planned, but it's good. Better than good. It's home. Behind her, she heard footsteps crunching through snow. Rowan appeared at her side, wrapping his coat around her shoulders without speaking. They stood together in the cold, watching the sun set over the valley that had become theirs. No regrets? He asked finally. Evelyn thought about the question seriously. About everything she'd lost, her father, her childhood home, the life she'd imagined. About everything she'd gained, 3 daughters, a partnership, a purpose. About the journey from desperate survival to genuine belonging. No regrets, she said. Not a single one. They walked back to the house together as stars began emerging in the darkening sky. Through the windows, Evelyn could see the girls setting the table for supper, their movements synchronized in the way of people who'd learned to function as a unit. Smoke curled from the chimneys, warm light spilled onto the snow, and from inside came the sound of laughter. This was what it meant to build a life from wreckage. Not perfection, but something real and solid and lasting. Not romance out of fairy tales, but partnership forged through crisis and strengthened through commitment. Not a family born of blood, but one chosen daily through small acts of courage and kindness. Evelyn stepped through the door into warmth and noise and belonging, Rowan's hand steady in hers, and felt the last piece of herself settle into place. She was home, not because she'd found the perfect life, but because she'd found people worth building an imperfect life with. And that, she thought, as Lily crashed into her legs demanding to be picked up, was more than enough. The story that had begun in desperation and dust ended in snow and laughter and the quiet certainty that sometimes the best things in life arrive in the hardest wrapping. Sometimes love grows slowly from respect instead of blooming instantly from passion. Sometimes family means choosing each other over and over until the choice becomes as natural as breathing. And sometimes, just sometimes, the life you get is better than the one you planned for, not despite its unconventional beginning, but because of it.